So I'm going to hand over now to Virginia, CEO of the Heritage Council, to just give a welcome.
Thank you, Ian, and good morning, everybody. Happy New Year. It's the first time we've had a public event in 2022, and it's really pleasant that this is our first public event. The Historic Towns Initiative, as all of you know, is it's a project that we run in collaboration with the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage. I always get the line-up wrong. And it's great to welcome the Minister for Heritage here this morning, who has been a wonderful supporter of the scheme, and also to welcome colleagues from the department as well, Katrina, Sarah and Jackie, Ashley, and I'm sure there are more on the call as well. Our other big partner in making this project successful are the local authorities, and it's wonderful also to see so many representatives of local authorities here. They're very valued partners for us, and we're really appreciative of their interest in this programme and the other programmes that we run. So welcome to everybody. This year our scheme is increased somewhat to a total budget of 2 million, and the other significant change is that we wish to encourage applicants to look at buildings and their potential use for residences. And we're in particularly encouraging local authorities to work with private owners to stimulate them to revitalise their buildings and to bring them back into use as much as possible. And for that reason, for the first year, this scheme will extend over a 2-year funding period, which we know allows some flexibility, and that's very essential and necessary. There are lots of practical elements that we're aware need to be improved and enhanced to make the scheme more usable and I suppose to reap greater potential from the investment. And this is a very significant step forward, and the Minister's efforts in supporting this, and indeed those of colleagues in the department, must be acknowledged, because without their support, this sort of flexibility would not be possible. Today, we're going to hear some very excellent case studies of projects which were completed in the past 12 months. It was a great pleasure for me, even despite some of the restrictions this year, to get to visit those projects. And it's really one of the most rewarding bits of my job, is to get out on the ground and see what's happening. They're very, very important projects. They mean a lot to small towns and small communities. And there's a great sense of lifting spirits when people see areas in their town and in their place that are important to them for a variety of reasons and associations, which may have been neglected in the past or have fallen into disrepair. The revitalisation of these places and these buildings really supports communities, a sense of community cohesion and spirit, and a sense of place. So thanks to all of you for making that happen. It's my great pleasure this morning to introduce Minister Noonan to talk to us and to open this workshop. And I would like to thank the Minister again for all his support, to personally wish him well for 2022, and to invite him to talk to us this morning. Thank you.
Good morning, Virginia, and good morning, everyone. Oflin Fivashadi of Golair. It's a great privilege to be here with you again this morning. And it's my understanding, I think, that almost, if not all, local authorities are represented here today. So it's fantastic. And again, to thank our host, the Heritage Council, along with, as Virginia said, our colleagues from my own department. And while we would have had hoped, I suppose, to meet in person, we do hope, and we live in hope that that things will improve as the year moves on, and we get to visit some of the projects and meet each other in person over the course of 2022. And certainly, hopefully, we're heading into a better space in terms of the pandemic. And again, I want to thank Virginia and her colleagues in the Heritage Council for organising this really important event, and for the invitation to join you all this morning to celebrate some of the great success stories of the 2021 HTI, as well as some of the important new developments and innovations in the 2022 scheme. And I want to pay tribute to everyone involved in getting last year's HTI projects across the line, working within the restrictions that were there, and with considerable supply challenges to complete works while ensuring health and safety of owners, residents, those working on projects, and indeed themselves. In December, it was my great pleasure to announce a funding of €2 million for this year's HTI, and I'm pleased that this year's increase in funding will allow more towns to participate in the scheme in 2022, and also that the HTI this year is encouraging applications which will help bring vacant and underused floor area in historic buildings back into residential use, as per the Housing for All strategy launched by Minister O'Brien last autumn. As in 2021, the scheme will again seek to address the impacts of climate change on our built heritage, helping the implementation of Ireland's climate change sectoral adaptation plan for built and archaeological heritage, which was published by our department in 2019, and a very innovative plan it is too, I have to say. The HTI also links closely to the forthcoming Town Centres First policy, a programme for government commitment which recognises the many vital roles played by our towns, but which also addresses the issues of dereliction and decline. The policy, which was to be launched this week, in fact, but has been deferred for a few weeks into early February, will provide a strong basis for towns across the country to develop and realise the very great potential that exists in the uniqueness of the Irish town. The Town Centre First policy will seek to address and to build on strong towns that can provide services and opportunities to local residents and businesses alike. And I must stress at this point that it's not going to be the panacea to all of the challenges and the opportunities facing Irish towns. And one thing Virginia and I are conscious of as we visit towns across the country is that a lot of the animation needs to come from the ground up. I think that's critically important, and that's what's happening. We're seeing that innovation and that collaboration happening at scale now across our towns, and I think that's really, really encouraging, and that's been led by our local authorities as well. A key element of the policy will be the formulation of a town plan tailored to individual towns and addressing the town's unique challenges. The plan will be driven by genuine local support and ownership of a town team, and crucially aided by the technical, administrative and other supports of their local authorities. Town Centres First will also enable communities to access a range of existing and new funding streams. And this could broaden out into a lot of other areas such as climate action funding, active travel, but also partnerships. If we look at the potential for learning exchange right across Europe through initiatives such as URBACT, I think there's a fantastic opportunity out of Town Centres First to collaborate, not just in an Irish context, but right across Europe, because these challenges facing our urban centres are Europe-wide and they're worldwide. And I think we have a lot to learn from our European partners in that regard. The flagship Urban Regeneration and Rural Regeneration Development Funds, as you know, are already providing funding for town development projects right across the country. And new funding application calls for these in 2022 will concentrate on projects focused on the Town Centres First implementation. So you're seeing a lot of interdisciplinary approaches via the various funding streams happening right now. And I think that interdisciplinary role, which is critically important within our local authorities of our heritage officers, our conservation officers, biodiversity officers, archivists, archaeological officers, we would love to see a full team of that. I know we speak a lot about it, but I think we're starting to move in that space now. And again, I suppose to return finally to the HTI, this very impressive and successful scheme, which puts heritage at the heart of towns and invests in it to drive it in the regeneration, is now in its 5th year, having supported 23 towns across Ireland to date. It really has been wonderful to watch the HTI grow and to see the benefits of the initiative reach right across the length and breadth of the country, from Shannon to Listowel and from Sligo to Enniscorthy. And we're seeing a great coherence to that work, and it's not piecemeal, it's now very coherent and strategic. And I really welcome that approach right across the country. And 5 years is a good point at which to pause and to reflect on the successes of the scheme and to ask if there are any things that could be done differently or done better. And to that end, I'm looking forward to hearing the presentation by Caoimhín and Dara from MCO on the review of the HTI and their findings and recommendations. But most of all, I'm looking forward to hearing all the presentations here this morning. We have an exciting time ahead for our town centres. I think there's a convergence of a lot of good fortune and a lot of good work over many, many years that is now coming to fruition. And you're seeing it being led through government, through our department, right across other departments of government. and the innovation and the calls and the work, the policy work that has been led by the Heritage Council for so many years is now being brought to full circle and brought to fruition. So I'm looking forward to the presentations, and most of all, I'm looking forward to seeing some of the projects evolve and the projects come in, as I'm sure Virginia and her team are as well in 2022. So thank you very much, and I look forward to this morning's proceedings.
Thank you, Minister. It is a very exciting time for towns, and we very much look forward to the Heritage Council to the publication of the town's first policy. Certainly timely, and congratulations again to colleagues in the department for all the work they have invested in getting it to this far. I would like to hand over to Ian now, who will coordinate the rest of today's workshop. It's an exciting lineup. Thanks again to all of you for your participation, and good luck with your applications and your projects.
Thank you, Virginia, and thank you very much, Minister, for those words. As Virginia said, we have a very interesting morning in store. Now, there is one change I just want to say from the start. Our paper by Stuart Logan on the Town Centre First policy has had to be postponed because the policy is yet to be launched, but the Minister did cover that. So what that means is we'll be going straight to Listowel very shortly. Just in terms of interaction, please use the chat function. Keep those questions coming. I think when we did this webinar last year, that worked really well. There were some great questions coming there, and we will have time to answer and address those as the morning goes on. We will also get a break in the morning because working on a screen is can be a little bit tiresome. So we will get a break just for a stretch and just to give your eyes a rest. Other than that, look, we're little bit in the hands of the technology. There may well be glitches, but we just have to work our way through it, and I know everything will be fine. So without further ado, Victoria, are you ready to go ahead a little bit earlier?
I sure am ready to go.
Okay. So our first speaker then is Victoria McCarthy. Victoria is the Architectural Conservation Officer and Heritage Officer with Kerry County Council. She's going to tell us about the community-led regeneration HTI project in Listowel. Thank you, Victoria.
So good morning, everybody, and greetings from Kerry. It's the most beautiful morning here this morning. So the purpose of my talk today is to explain to you about the Listowel Historic Towns Initiative from last year with the title of The Rejuvenation of a Market Town. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Listowel, it is located in County Kerry. It is in the northern part of the county with a fairly large agricultural hinterland. Traditionally, it would have been very much an agricultural town with a very strong trading function. So the town evolved from the 13th century. It was home to the Earl of Kerry, and the castle here in the image is from the 15th century, an Anglo-Norman castle, which was located at a strong in the River Feel. Nemo's map from the early 1800s, Alexander Nemo, on the top right, shows that the town was very much clustered around this castle and around a square at the time, with some radial development emerging from the town square. Interestingly, that square is still the hub of Listowel town, and the map and the aerial image show that it still remains the case, with some development coming out from the approach roads into the town leading towards Limerick and Cork. So the Listowel HTI basically emerged from a number of years of work. I suppose that started in 2017 with the publication of the Listowel Heritage and a Community-Led Regeneration Strategy, which was funded by the Heritage Council, delivered by my predecessor, TJ O'Mahony, as Heritage Officer. And in that plan, there were a number of agreed actions which emerged from extensive public consultation, and I've just included them here on the screen. 3 actions relating to the built heritage assets of the town, which included the production of an architectural conservation toolkit, the holding of a public exhibition to promote the shop fronts of Listowel town, and also then to try and seek conservation grant funding to rejuvenate those shop fronts. 2018 also saw the emergence of a Listowel Town Centre health check report carried out with Alison Harvey in the Heritage Council. So for those of you who aren't that familiar with the Listowel shop fronts, I've just included 3 images here to show you the quality of those shop fronts. There was a very well-known stucador called Pat Mcauliffe from the turn of the 20th century. Pat did an awful lot of work in both Listowel, the wider part of North Kerry, and also in Abbeyfield and County Limerick. Pat was, I suppose, a most incredible craftsman, looking at, I suppose, Celtic revival and Byzantine influences in the shop front design. And it is really still most extraordinary that the love of those historic shop fronts remains to this day. Listowel is well known, I suppose, for the quality of those shop fronts, but also, I suppose, the community involvement in maintaining those shop fronts, as you can see here in the 2 images on either side of the screen, showing the level of detail taken by painters of those shop fronts that remains to this day. So just a few more images. So it wasn't just Pat Mcauliffe who was involved. There was also another man called Paddy Whelan, who did a lot of stucco work as well. So there's a huge amount of built heritage assets in the town, and I suppose a lot of it is under pressure. So in 2018, the Listowel Business and Chamber Alliance and Kerry County Council, we entered into a partnership and produced a seminar called Getting Stuck In with Stucco, Pat Mcauliffe's Listowel. So I suppose this was my first project that I ran in Listowel town, and the aim was to try and highlight the architectural character and the qualities of those historic shop fronts. So a condition survey was carried out of all the shop fronts. The community was invited to a seminar. There was a few experts were included as well, as in addition to a practical demonstration as to how those shop fronts could be conserved. And I suppose I learned a lot during that seminar. Firstly, it was packed, and secondly, most of the interest from the floor was in relation to the practical workshops, so the actual the physical side of how those shop fronts can be conserved. One of the outputs of that event was a heritage shop front walking trail, which has been used, I suppose, from a tourism point of view to try and promote the built heritage as another tourism offering for Listowel town. In 2019, I did another event in Listowel, this time with the Tidy Towns, which was also partially funded by Leader, and that was to try and extend the work that had been done in 2018. The 2019 project was looking at the conservation areas, the designated architectural conservation areas in Listowel town, which included an awful lot of the town centre. Carson and Crushel architects were employed to carry out a condition survey and a review and appraisal of all the buildings within those conservation areas, and a substantial piece of work was completed at the end. Again, there was a public seminar. We did some information boards on various elements of Listowel's architectural character, as well as the publication of a toolkit. So this is the toolkit here, and this is just an image from one of the event. So so in January 2021, I held a webinar for people in Listowel, I suppose just to try and kickstart the HTI application once authorization had been received from our senior management team. And I suppose I would have used the 2018 Pat Mcauliffe condition survey and the work done by Carson Crushel architects of the conservation areas of Listowel town to try and, I suppose, provide as much information to owners of those buildings as possible. The study area that was proposed for the Listowel HTI corresponded with the conservation areas that were covered by Carson and Crushel architects. So I suppose it was just trying to build on previous plans and public consultation that had happened in the past. So during that 2021 January webinar, I outlined to the attendees the kind of buildings that we were hoping would come in for the Listowel HTI. Listowel is very much a residential town centre, just something I noted from Virginia's speech earlier. This is it's interesting because it's different to other towns in Kerry, that there is such a strong residential land use, I suppose, and very much a vibrant occupancy, which is good. So trying to show that the scheme was open to residential units as well as the commercial and mixed use developments within that study area. The type of eligible works were, as we outlined, the capital works. Again, trying to promote conservation-led repair where at all possible. And obviously, because it was for conservation areas, not all the buildings were protected structures. So there was a little bit more flexibility there, I suppose, than I would have had in previous years. And again, focusing on trying to review the vacancy issue, promoting reuse and rejuvenation. So wherever possible, the idea of bringing empty buildings, particularly at upper floor level, back into use was highlighted as being something that the County Council was trying to promote through the scheme. So the key dates were outlined, the time, about the grant deadlines, and I suppose just the process of how the grant system would work between us, the community and the Heritage Council. And I think it was helpful at that time just to explain, I think from the outset, I suppose, how the scheme would work. So we were very, very lucky, and Listowel was allocated funding in 2021 by the Heritage Council for just over €245,000. So I suppose typically, and it's something that I really miss, is being able to go and do traditional town hall type of meetings. But given COVID, we were left with another webinar, which was held in March, run by Kerry County Council. And at that, I sought letters of support from the, this is the January 2021 webinar, so I sought letters of support from the community to make the application from property owners, the businesses, residential owners, as well as the wider Listowel community. So just in relation to those letters of support, and I'm sorry now I can't see my screen properly, in relation to those letters of support, I ran a couple of projects last year. In one of those projects, I got one letter of support. For Listowel, I got about 80. And it showed me how much interest there was, I suppose, from the community, and not only just business owners or property owners, but school teachers, doctors, a whole range from I suppose, community groups. It was overwhelming, I must say, and a really, really good indication as to the level of community interest and need for support to try and help their town along. So I sought expressions of interest, and you'll see there in the screen that when I was applying for the Listowel HTI, I had on file nearly €390,000 worth of quoted work from people who said they would be interested if allocated funding. So sorry now for just the mix up there. So when the HTI funding was allocated, this was how Kerry County Council set up the scheme. We advertised that Kerry had been successful, and it was very important to use that community support here to get the news out, we'll say. So from that point of view, the Chamber Alliance, the Tidy Towns, even the PPN, was very, very helpful, I suppose, to try and make sure that the notification of the scheme reaches as wide an audience as possible. A grant application process then was held with third parties in Listowel town who would have to apply to Kerry County Council to get funding under the HTI allocation. As part of that, they needed to get 5 quotations for the work. They needed to provide proof of ownership, insurance, and all the usual things that go with the grant. So I suppose there was a lot of work involved for the owners at that point. The Chamber Alliance also asked me to deliver a workshop to intending applicants from their point of view, which was also very helpful. It wasn't just coming from the County Council, but it was coming back from the community as well. So once the applications were received by Kerry County Council, there was an assessment by a panel with a number of weighted criteria, looking at, I suppose, the significance of the building, how important the work was, the impact on the streetscape, and I suppose the impact on the wider community as well. A provisional allocation was made to those who were successful. They had to formally accept the terms and conditions. We'd set up our finance and administration of it, and then we provided a very detailed conservation methodology for each building owner. So I'll just go through briefly a few of the projects. There were 12 projects that received funding from under the Listowel HTI. One of the flagship projects was the St. John's Theatre and Art Centre. This is a former Church of Ireland Board of First Fruits church built in the early, about 1811, 1813. And we knew from the 2019 appraisal that was done by Carson and Crushell that the property enhanced the street character due to its reuse as a public venue, as an asset, its prominent position within the streetscape, and it's the elegance of its spire. And I love these images. This is a Lawrence collection, the top left, and it shows, I suppose, the prominent position of the Church of Ireland, which was located in the middle of that town square that I showed you in Nemo's map. And very much an interesting location in that it's on an elevated site when you're approaching from, we'll say, the Butter Road that would have led from Cork and coming in from Limerick, and very much a very obvious positioning on the landscape of the dominant established church, if you will. And I also like the picture because it shows all the agricultural, the market fair side of that square, how busy it was at the time. It was very much the agricultural market heart of Listowel town. And obviously the nerd side of me loves the plans that I sourced from the representative body library in relation to the floor plan and elevation drawings. So this is the church today. At the start of the HTI, there was water pouring in the spire. The owner or the custodian of the building had given me these images showing that the reality is now plastic buckets and blankets to mop up the water, try and stop it from running down the wires. And that square is now used as a car park. So a rather sorry state of affairs. So the St. John's Church application scored quite highly from the assessment panel in terms of its impact on the wider town, and I suppose its community importance as a theatre and art centre. So a detailed methodology was done by the conservation architect, who was John Higarty, a grade 1 conservation architect from Forum in Cork, and work began on the spire to stop that water from coming in. As often happens, once scaffolding was erected and a detailed inspection was carried out during the summer, it was noted that there was more work needed, and luckily funds were secured to carry out that work and do a fairly good and thorough long-term job. So stained glass windows that were in a very poor state of repair were also carried out, repair to those, and those were done by a man called Glyn Palmer from Brusnan, North Kerry. And I suppose on a Kerry County Council side of things, it's important that we try and ensure that where possible, we support local conservation craftsmanship wherever possible. So it was great to be able to support the Brusnan North Kerry stained glass conservator in this case. The large clocks on the church spire were also conserved, and they were in a very poor state of repair, and this was done by Stokes in Cork, and being a Cork woman, I didn't mind, thought they had to go over the county border to get the work done. And it was wonderful to see them just before they went back up, back into position. They are extremely heavy, beautiful pieces of work, and I suppose it's very rare that any of us will get to play with one of those on the ground. So And there was cementitious pointing down all the way up along the church spire, which was raked out and redone using lime. And look, I suppose there were lots of trials and errors in trying to ensure that the pinnings and the rest of it, in terms of how that actually finished up, how it would end up and how it would look. So there was a bit of toing and froing on site before everybody was happy. So this is the church now that it's finished. Images were just taken there in October, so I'm hoping to get some nice blue sky images over the summer. But it looks absolutely great. It looks really, really good. And as I said, when you approach from the Cork Road, you come up a hill and you see this beautiful spire occupying a terminal vista. It's really, really good. And the water, luckily, has stopped pouring in the tower. And I suppose it's just, one never knows fully how these projects are going to work out, and have all the leaks been stopped, and I'm delighted to report that is indeed the case. So another project was in relation to some new window work that was done. The building here on the left was the light blue building, had some lovely PVC windows that were put in, and they were taken out. With chimney on the building as well was repaired, and properly profiled and researched new timber sliding sash windows were put in with historic glass. And I must say, when you approach this building, those windows really, really lift the streetscape, and they have been a talking point, which is really, really important. This building here, the picture in the bottom left shows some lovely aluminium windows that were put in that didn't even fit the oak from where the originals would have been taken out from. And this is one of the facade improvements, or the decluttering that happened under the Listowel HTI. So new windows were put into this building as well. And during the course of work, I suppose I'd met the owner and was saying, look, you have a lot of signage, projecting signs. There was a load of redundant wiring as well, and a lot of clutter. And I suppose just to try and say, look, the wiring running along your shop front cornicing is causing damage. There's water coming in, you don't need it. Can you get it clear, tidied up? And that happened. And as well, getting back to that comment I made earlier about the painting, the owner got the building painted, which is just extraordinary, the level of detail. And I don't see this in Kerry elsewhere, this care and love of painting of their shop fronts and picking out by hand of all the detailing rather than just applying a single paint colour. It's absolutely beautifully done, beautifully executed. Building across the road was a window conservation project. And also, interestingly, this building, which was a ground floor shop front and vacant ground floor shop unit and upstairs residential, had been vacant for quite a number of years. And the Listowel HTI has, I suppose, provided the owner with the financial support to renovate the building, and it is now being turned into a single family home using the exempted development provisions, which is excellent. And I'm really looking forward to seeing lights on upstairs in this building once the internal work is finished. So that's a very positive outcome. And I suppose it's something that is very important to me, that the HTI isn't just about building conservation, it's about people, it's about bringing life back into town. This building here is a project that included replacement of aluminium first and second floor windows and ground floor window, and an aluminium front door, as well as removal of a cement render that had failed, repaired to lintel, and beautiful lime rendering carried out. And again, the conservation architect researched all those windows using old photographs and looking at the few remaining examples of historic window joinery we've left in Listowel. And even the top lights are beautifully done, but it was the lime and the ruling and lining of that lime render which really makes the building stand out. Again, this building was recently bought by a lady who is going to be living there, or who does live there full time. So it's a wonderful example of, I think, a turn in the tide of people coming back into living in town. And she said, you know, people used to think she was mad to do it, and She said, it's wonderful. And I passed over Christmas, and lovely to see, you know, the candle in the window lighting and signs of life. And she used to email me and text me and let me know that people were watching her building as the scaffolding was coming down. There was lots of talk about it on the street, and even a lady stopped me to ask me about the lime and the ruling and lining of it, which is, it's great. People notice. This is another window conservation project. It's an empty building, and I'm hoping the owner is going to look at bringing in a use, and even saying to him, look, you're sitting on an asset. If nothing else, you're sitting on an asset. It's capable of being reused, and I'm hoping that the window conservation will lend a kind of a push or an impetus to him. He also did the shutters here as well, which you can see, which was an add-on, which is excellent. This was a focal building, again, another new window project. This is located just off the town square. And again, it was provided funding because of its very strong impact on the square itself. And we're hoping that the owner might decide to re-render the building, but we'll see. Carnegie Free Library, this is one of my last buildings, is another window conservation project. And again, I suppose this building is occupied by the KDYS, the Kerry Youth Dress and Service. So it's a community occupied building, and again, in need of support from a financial point of view. And it's very important, I think, that the HTI supports these types of community groups to try and keep buildings occupied that may otherwise struggle to be used. So in terms of community support throughout the scheme, we had, I suppose, notices up on site that the buildings were being supported by the HTI. St. John's did their own advertising and I suppose PR work to promote the work that was being done in St. John's. So lovely to see articles like this appear in the local paper. Iconic jewel gets a vital makeover. Look, it's good for the Heritage Council, it's good for the department, it's good for the County Council, it's good for the custodian of the building, and it's good for Listowel, I suppose, just to be able to I suppose, show off what it has, particularly in a year where the talk on the ground at the start of 2021 was, oh, COVID is closing down the town centre. It was a really important boost. One of my favourite images is the one in the middle, which was windows currently under repair, supported by Kerry County Council Historic Towns Initiative. And I'm sorry that the Heritage Council and the department didn't get their logos on this one, but it was put up by an owner by himself in the ground floor of his building. And I thought it was just doty to see, you know, people, it matters to people. And for the Heritage Week event, St. John's Theatre very kindly hosted myself and the county archivist. We had a chat about stories in stone. And I suppose this is an interesting thing that I'd like to do in future years is try and bring in other parts of, I suppose, the local authority into the HTI and building conservation. And Mike Lynch, the county archivist, very kindly researched all the stoned, you know, the memorial stones that were hung on the inside of the spire that was conserved. So the picture I showed you at the start with the bucket and the water pouring in, that's where those memorial stones were hung. And he went and reviewed all the people whose names appeared on those stones. And we had a lovely chat about the stories, the families, the people who would have lived and died in the Listowel community, whose names were remembered on those stones. So it was a very interesting project, and of course set in the beautiful former nave of the Church of Ireland with the three ladies and those stained glass windows to our backdrop. So so that was a nice project. So just to finish off, it's been a very, very positive grant scheme, I think, this year, and I am very, very happy with it, I suppose, really. And some advice for those of you who are considering applying this year: make sure your project is plan-led It is helpful, I suppose, from a methodology point of view. It's helpful in terms of community support, and I suppose even in terms of connection with community, that you would have some good plans in place and strategies in place to lead the project. That community support is absolutely vital. It's vital in terms of letters of support to lodge the application, but it's specifically vital to know that you are hitting the ground running with people who are interested and up for carrying out the project. The time scale of this is very, very short. Like most grants, you're inclined to run out of time. There's problems, all sorts of problems, you know, access of labour, access materials, costs go up, problems occur, people get cranky. So it's important to try and ensure that there's good community support and connection there at the start. From a county council point of view, the administration of the scheme is very, very important. So the setup and the procedure about how you're going to run it is important to have a clear idea from the outset. I know that other local authorities do this scheme quite differently, and I would suggest that it might be a good idea for us to, or for the Heritage Council to maybe talk to different local authorities about, I suppose, different ways of running the scheme, just to see, can we learn from each other? Because I could certainly do with some advice about ways to run it. The conservation methodology for each building is very, very important, just to ensure that there's a high quality delivered all the way through. And again, maintaining regular contact with the owners, and also I suppose the Heritage Council throughout the project is extremely important. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Victoria. That was an amazing whistle-stop tour through a great project in Listowel. Some very interesting comments for you. Some comments about the amount of heavy lifting and public engagement, just making those connections with owners. The importance which you acknowledge of supporting traditional craftsmanship, particularly the local ones. But a really interesting question there, maybe you could expand on it. Why did Listowel hold on to its core population? Why are people willing to live in the town? I think a lot of people are interested in that.
So am I. And I think it's because, I think it's because Listowel is minded so much by not only people living there, but also the business owners. So I suppose during the Listowel HTI, there was a lot of kerfuffle around the end of August, because buildings were under scaffolding and the races were coming, the Listowel races, right? And apparently the owners and the businesses in Listowel paint their buildings every year for the races. Not all of them, obviously, but there's a noticeable uplift of how the streets look for the races. They bring in thousands of people every year, and it's worth a huge amount of money to the local economy. And I think that probably helps. It's also a very, the boundaries of the town are quite tight as well. You also have a very good quality of architectural finish, and also, you know, I suppose looking at the Pat Mcauliffe shop fronts, they stand out. You have a town centre hotel that stands out, and you also, I suppose, have a lot of railway houses that are beautifully kept. They've got limestone fronts, they're single story, they're all occupied. So, and they're within the former town council boundary. And I think those factors, coupled with some excellent planning work by Kerry County Council, has ensured that there's a good residential population. But it's not something I see elsewhere, you know. And it's a very good question, and I think something I'll give some thought to see what makes Listowel tick as opposed to somewhere like Tralee that is hemorrhaging residential population. If I find out the answer, it's something to be promoted.
I think from my own visits to Listowel over the years, I've always been struck by the sense of pride, the sense of place. You don't have to walk very far,
Yeah.
You get talking to somebody that can tell you amazing things about various buildings and various characters.
Yeah,
Just
there's a very strong Tidy Towns group there, Ian, and I suppose, you know, they've won Ireland's Tidiest Town, so that maybe this is visible elsewhere in other Tidy Town winners. I don't know, but there's a huge, and as I said, those letters of support, you know, I don't get that elsewhere. It was absolutely extraordinary. A call went out and they were just coming in. And even when the HDI was allocated, the news got out, the amount of good wishes and well done and calls, and brilliant. So maybe that's it too.
And then you've just one other question. What percentage of funding did owners provide for works? Well, the minimum figure in the HDI scheme is 20%, but my memory is that you had some that contributed more for this particular project.
Yeah, so some contributed just the 20% and others contributed much less than the 20%. So there might have been, I think one might have been maybe in around 40%, the one where it was the conversion from vacant property into a single home. So there was a lot more work done, and the HTI in that case just prompted the start of the project. And once he started, he kept going. So that was it.
Okay, well, look, there are really glowing comments in the chat, so I think have a read of those at your leisure, and well done. So thank you very much, Victoria. Time keeps marching on for all of us, so we're now going to go to another amazing project in Ballyshannon in County Donegal, and we're going to hear from the Heritage Officer, Dr. Joseph Gallagher, and Colette Beattie, the Conservation Officer. So I'm handing over to Joe and Colette now. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Ian, and thanks for the invitation to come and speak to you this morning about our experience in Ballyshannon under the Historic Towns Initiative. In terms of our presentation today, we thought we'd just give you just a brief introduction to Ballyshannon itself, a little bit of advice in terms of getting started on your Historic Towns Initiative project. Colette will provide an overview of the conservation works that we undertook, and we'll also then talk about some of the lessons that we learned. So Ballyshannon lays claim to being Ireland's oldest town. Some of the settlement in the area dates back to 2000 years BC. You can see there that it's situated at the mouth of the River Erne. And in 1423, there was an O'Donnell castle built at that strategic crossing point on the river itself. And of course, it is very strategic, and the garrison, there was a garrison based there, so it was a garrison town. It was also created a borough by royal charter on March 23rd, 1613. And you can see that wonderful 14-arch bridge, the former 14-arch bridge, which was built in 1680. That's part of the story as we go along. Ballyshannon also had a George Wilkinson designed workhouse that was opened in 1843 that served Fermanagh, Donegal and Leitrim. And the effects of the famine weren't as bad in this area as perhaps in other parts of Donegal and indeed other parts of Ireland, because there was quite a strong fishing tradition in the area, and that helped supplement the diet. Ballyshannon is also home to William Allingham, the poet, and you might be familiar with his refrain from his poem The Fairies: up the airy mountain, down the rushy glen, we daren't go a-hunting for fear of little men. The house in which he was born, which is located in the Mall in Ballyshannon, was also part of our Historic Towns Initiative. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, Kathleen Falls hydroelectric scheme was built upstream from Ballyshannon, and that altered really the course of the Erne and also impacted on the town of Ballyshannon itself. The river was channelized, and gone was the 14-arch bridge, replaced by a single span bridge today. It also had impact on the fishing industry in the area, and behind the dam itself, quite a lot of lands were flooded, and there were at least 2 historic houses that are now underwater. But today, Ballyshannon is one of Donegal's heritage towns. 5 heritage towns were designated by Donegal County Council in 2000 as heritage towns. It's also a historic town, designated by the department because of its archaeological significance. There are 67 protected structures in town, 75 structures on the National Inventory of Architectural Heritage. And you can see the archaeological importance of the town itself in that in Ballyshannon and its environs, there are 35 recorded monuments in the area. Ballyshannon is also located along the Wild Atlantic Way, so it's very important from a tourism point of view. And in our county development plan, it's identified as a strategic town performing a special economic function related to cultural heritage and enterprise, tourism and archaeological heritage. Our approach was very much conservation plan led. We produced our conservation plan for Ballyshannon in December of 2020. And we also had the collaborative town centre health check conducted in 2019, as well as a Ballyshannon design guide that we'd launched earlier that year. This builds on a variety of other initiatives as well by the local authority and by the local community. We held a seminar back in 2014 looking at the establishment of civic trusts to conserve the built heritage in our towns and villages, and that was held in Ballyshannon. In 2009, we also launched our Heritage Town brochures, which were essentially walking trails of our heritage towns, highlighting the built and archaeological heritage of those areas. There's been a lot done too at local community level. Historic Ballyshannon have produced a wonderful walking guide to the town, and the Ballyshannon Regeneration group, who are partners in our Historic Towns initiative, also launched a trail a few years ago, and you can see one of their interpretive panels there. Donegal County Council, through our Regeneration team, have also produced a draft Regeneration strategy and action plan, and that was produced in the middle of last year. In terms of advice, in terms of getting started, the Historic Towns Initiative provides opportunities for cross-directorate cooperation. Colette, as Conservation Officer, is based on our Planning Department, whereas I, as Heritage Officer, is based in our Culture Division. And that allows opportunity for us to work on a cross-directorate basis. And sure, where else would you be on a Friday afternoon on freezing temperatures with gale force winds forecast, except on the 5th story of scaffolding on a historic house in Ballyshannon. One of the first steps that you'll face really is establishing your Historic Towns Initiative partnership team. And as well as the Conservation Officer and the Heritage Officer, we also had an Administrative Officer, Joe McMenamin. We had a Grade 1 Conservation Architect in Duncan McLaren from Daedalus Architecture, who was appointed by the local community to supervise the project. And we also had community involvement represented by the Ballyshannon Regeneration Group. And again, I would like to pay particular thanks to Councillor Barry Sweeney and to Terry McIntyre, who were the driving forces behind our initiative. One of the next decisions that we had to make was where to focus our attention in Ballyshannon. First of all, we had to decide on the town itself, and we looked at a number of towns and decided on Ballyshannon. Even within Ballyshannon, then we looked at about 5 or 6 different areas of town that we could focus our attention. And we agreed and decided upon the Mall, which provides a mix of 18th and 19th century buildings with some of earlier origin and indeed later origin. So the Mall extends itself here from the diamond, and again, sort of Ballyshannon has a plantation origin as well, and extends down here, down along the Mall, down to the once thriving Mall Quay, the port of Ballyshannon. So that was the area that we principally focused on, with the exception of one other building on Upper Main Street, and Colette will talk to you about that. Ballyshannon, the Mall area has got an element of faded glory about it. And again, William Allingham, kind of alludes to the importance of the Mall and reminisces about it in that no more unpleasant evenings we'll saunter down the Mall. And the Mall is very important, not only for residents and tourists, for walking, because again, you can do a circuitous route as you can come back up along to the main street by taking the back Mall as well. One of the early steps we had to take as well was to decide on what buildings we were going to include in our project. And our experience is quite different from that of Virginia's, in that we decided on the buildings based on the conservation need in our conservation plan. So we decided what buildings we would like to see included in that based on the need that was highlighted. And then we approached the owners themselves and invited them to be part of our project prior to application. So there was intensive discussions. We had to secure their commitment in terms of funding. We had to secure their commitment in that they would maintain the building in use or bring it back into use. So again, the Heritage Council provided us with funding of €237,700. Donegal County Council invested €85,000. And in terms of private leverage, we usually asked for 30% from the individual owners, and that provided us with 134,000, giving us a total project cost of about €457,000. Once we got approval for the scheme, we set up the Shannon Historic Towns Initiative Residents Association, which was composed of all the property owners in our Historic Towns Initiative. And this becomes important a little bit later on when we talk about the path to payment. So we established the Residents Association. The Residents Association opened a collective bank account. And again, that's important in terms of the payments a little bit later on. They signed a legal agreement with Donegal County Council agreeing to abide by the conditions of the Historic Towns Initiative. And you can see the first page of that agreement there to your left. And the residents themselves, it was the individual residents themselves who commissioned the works. So they commissioned the works directly with the contractors. And again, we paid them in the form of grants, and we'll talk about how we did that in just a moment. But I'm going to hand you over now to my colleague, Colette Beattie, who will talk to you about some of the conservation works that were undertaken.
Yep, thank you, Joe. This is a map that shows the 14 buildings that were subject to our application, and they're highlighted there in blue. So there's 13 along the Mall and 1 then on Main Street. So the buildings were in the various states of repair, and there were quite a few that were derelict. And so, as Joe said there, we chose the buildings in terms of the impact that they would have on the streetscape and what we wanted to achieve from the project. They're a mixture of both residential and commercial properties. And once we got in contact with all the owners, they were really delighted and quickly to agree to get on board. So in terms of timescales, we got word that we were successful in March and had to have the project completed in November. So there's 14 properties there, quite ambitious schedules of work. So it's really, really important to start those works as soon as possible. And it's great that this year that, that there's a biannual, that can roll into the next year. So from the very outset of our project, it was really important to establish a schedule of works and prioritise exactly what we wanted to achieve with each individual building. And in terms of the schedule of works, we put down estimated costs. And this is really important to kind of keep in our budget, and also in terms of the property owners, that they knew from the very outset the contribution that they would have to pay. So that was really important part of the process at the beginning. So what we would recommend to people is that before work start in site is to really engage with all your key stakeholders. So in terms of Shannon, there was kind of old electrical overhead wires, and we got in site, went through the whole schedule of works with the ESB, and we knew from the outset what we had to do for each individual building, and they were really helpful, and they provided all the work that we needed without any cost. We also got in contact with our roads engineers in terms of the scaffolding on both sides of the road, and we were able to phase those works so that we didn't have to close off any roads. So in terms of our tenders, we were really in terms of our tendering from the outset, we consulted very closely with the property owners, and there was a lot of local builders that they wanted to tender out to. We were very fortunate that we got tenders that were used to working with historic buildings, and there were 1 or 2 that didn't have that much experience, but they were eager to learn and to work under supervision. So this is one of the main properties on Main Street, and it was the old manor house, and as you can see, it's quite prominent on the streetscape. It's been derelict for quite a number of years and wasn't subject to probate. And you can see that the county council actually had to close off the footpath because there was a health and safety issue with slates falling off the roof. So we're really delighted to get this one involved in the HTA. So this is the works now underway. In terms of the schedule of works, it was roofing, and we were really fortunate that when we got up there and had a look, close inspection, that the timbers were all really good condition. But unfortunately, the chimneys were really fragile, and we had to rebuild those, so that we had to really adjust the schedule of works as we went along. One of the best things about this building was that we restored all the traditional joinery in the front of the building. And you can see this picture speaks for itself. The joinery came up as good as new, and the footpath is now opened up for the first time in a long time. And like everyone in town is talking about, you know, how great it is to have this building back to its former glory again. And this is another building that we didn't want to shy away from. It was a huge undertaking. So this is Condon House. It's on Nantaske's Heritage at Risk, and it hadn't been entered in the last 40 years. So we're kind of, in terms of our schedule of work, we kind of had to work in the dark a bit and kind of, you know, try and guess the condition, because we didn't have access to the building. And it was completely and utterly overgrown to the sides and the rear. So there was we just couldn't get entry to the building. So this is during the course of the works, and there was extensive you know, scaffolding that needed to be put in place, which was a big part of the budget. So this was the photograph taken when we first got into the building. So it was the first time the owner's seen it, first time we seen it, first time the contractor seen it. So we were all in a bit of shock. You can see that the water penetrated like through the roof, and the floors had collapsed. And I don't think any of us really expected it to be in this bad a condition. You can see daylight coming through the roof. And so once we got removed all the ivy and the vegetation, we really kind of seen, you know, exactly like the state of the building. And this photograph here is of the rear roof slope just before the works began. So in terms of this building, this particular building, there was extensive internal scaffolding that was required to give a safe working platform for the builders to actually re-roof. So a huge part of our budget went on scaffolding, and it was really difficult as well to get a scaffolder that was willing to take on this work. So I suppose we had to adjust our budget, you know, as the project progressed. So in terms of the various types of works that we undertook re-roofing. You can see here just putting on the Bangor Blue slates. We also did repair of rainwater goods, and also kind of repairing chimneys. And this is another example of when we got up close for close inspection, when the scaffolding was put up, that it was in really, really bad condition, and this had to be rebuilt as well too. And so we just have to, and this is a picture afterwards, you just have to as you go along, readjust the schedule of works and work with the builder and work with the owner. And this is the same building, the front elevation. You can see it's a traditional pub front. So over the years, in terms of the rainwater goods, there was a lot of water penetrating and above the Selene bar sign. And the result of that was that one of the wooden beams failed. So and this particular one, we had to work very closely with a structural engineer and a conservation architect to find a solution that would have a minimum intervention to the pub front and also to the panelled interior. So as part of that one as well, we restored all the joinery to the front, and we have worked really carefully in terms of the painting scheme. And we're really looking forward to getting that painted now when the weather improves. As part of that, you can see too, there's the sign writing is really important. And this is the sign writer, Jerry McGargle, and he actually done the sign painting before. And this is us having a consultation with him, and you know, everything is planned out now for when the weather improves. So as Joe mentioned, this is the derelict bakery. It has a huge frontage on the streetscape. So we kind of felt it was really important to kind of tackle this one as well. Although you know, there will be a redevelopment opportunity there in the short term, we felt it was really important to paint the building. And also kind of there's there's amalgamation there of older buildings, so we're restoring the Sash windows. And what's really lovely is that there's kind of ghost signage there in terms of the Bali Shannon bakery company, and we're kind of just kind of accentuating that and kind of within the painting scheme. So a large part of our work was in relation to the restoration of wooden windows, and that has been a huge success, and kind of retaining like all that historic fabric. And also there was like a lot of failure of cement render, and this is an example of just us kind of just re-rendering with line render in one of the properties, and that's an after photograph. And like one of the successes is just the restoration of the beautiful doors that are really important to those small details, and that's a couple of the our properties there. So this is another property that lay derelict for a number of years. Our schedule of works for this one was restoration of all the joinery work to the front. And this is after the joinery work was restored and put in on the ground on the first floor. And we also had designed and installed the dormer, like custom designed the dormer windows, but this photograph doesn't show it, but the property is looking really well, and there's a paint scheme as well ready for when the weather gets a lot better. So in terms of COVID did impact our project. I suppose that when we went out to tender, what we found was the cost of materials had significantly risen. So we did have to cut our cloth and really kind of prioritise, kind of look at our priorities in terms of what we wanted to achieve. What we also found too, it was really difficult to get contractors because they were so behind in all their other jobs. So in the course of our work, we contacted 17 contractors. Luckily enough, we got interest from 4 or 5, and we got tender responses from 3, and we were able to negotiate. We had 4 packages, so we were able to negotiate one of the contractors to take on another package, so we're quite lucky. So I'm going to hand you back now to Joe, who will take you through our lessons learned from our project.
Yeah, the Historic Towns Initiative also presented opportunities for us to leverage additional funding. As part of our project, we were able to access some funding under the Creative Ireland scheme. And as part of that, we undertook a mural on one of the historic buildings, and also looked at the meanwhile use of 3 vacant shop fronts along the Mall. One here, as you can see just to the right, the bakery, which is in process, and also one for a bike shop and one for a solicitor's office, the 3 buildings of which were vacant. There's also a need for strong conservation supervision in your project. And as I said, we were very fortunate to have a grade 1 conservation architect in the form of Duncan McLaren from Daedalus Architecture, who was commissioned by the Ballyshannon Regeneration Group to supervise all the works undertaken by all the residents. And that was important too in terms of our path to payment, because once the works were certified by our conservation architect, invoices were issued by the building contractor to the owners. That precipitated an on-site visit and works, a verification of works by the conservation officer and myself as heritage officer. The bills then were subsequently submitted to the by the Residents Association to Donegal County Council, and Donegal County Council released partial payment of the grant into the Residents Association bank account. And at the start of the project, all the residents inputted their 30% capital into that collective bank account. So there was some working capital there already. And then the Residents Association paid the building contractors. And this was quite important. This mechanism that we've used for the last 3 Historic Towns Initiative projects is important because it minimizes the short-term financial burden on private property owners, and it allows us to have a phased approach to the release of the grant funding and to be assured that the works are complete. The Historic Towns Initiative also presents opportunities for economies of scale. When sometimes this extensive scaffolding is in place on historic buildings, property owners decide to do additional works and they make those arrangements with the contractors themselves, or in some instances, neighbouring properties decide to avail of the opportunity of having the scaffolding erected and get it extended in order to do some works on their own property. It's also important to bear in mind when you're designing your project, to bear in mind retention costs. It's advisable to retain 10% of the costs initially from payment, just to make sure that the works are to the proper standard. That will reduce to 5% once the works are practically complete, and also to 0% after the defects liability period, which is after 6 months. So just bear that in mind as well in the design of your project. We would like to express a word of thanks to our sponsors, to the Heritage Council and to the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage for their generous funding in this initiative. And again, look at the funding as well that we were able to leverage from the local authority, Donegal County Council, and also from the private individuals. And collaboratively, it was a great experience. The credit really has to go as well to our local partners, the Ballyshannon Regeneration Group. And for Heritage Week, the Ballyshannon Regeneration Group produced a video on a virtual saunter down Ballyshanon's historic mall. And that's available on the Heritage Week website and also available on YouTube. And here you can see Olive Travers and Barry Sweeney, who along with Mary Duggan and Ryan Field and a variety of other contributors produced that wonderful video, which ultimately won the Heritage for All Ages Award at the National Heritage Awards last year. But it goes to emphasize the importance of community engagement. And as I said, we've been very fortunate in that the Ballyshannon Regeneration Group have really been great local partners and have provided that strong community support. And again, that was demonstrated as well, I think, by the strong letters of support that we received in advance of our application. So thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, Colette and I will be glad to answer them as best we can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Thank you, Colette. You do have questions. You have a lot of very interesting questions, and a lot of very good comments. Question for Colette from Sarah. How did you address the building with Probit issues?
Yeah, I suppose that one was, we kind of worked really closely with the community. So they were really good in terms of setting up meetings. And we had all-night meetings, and there's people that didn't live in within the country. So we had Zoom meetings. So there was a lot of work, a lot of background work that went into that, and kind of talking and, kind of coming to something that everyone was happy with. So I suppose it was just really a lot of communication right throughout the process too, to ensure that we got that building secured within the project.
A question from Anne-Marie Ryan. Is it a requirement that the building must be occupied after renovations? That's more one for us to answer. So far to date, we've taken the view that if you take some of the buildings that Joe talked about, in particular the condoms on the mall, that the funding will enable reuse. However, as this scheme develops and as we start to use Housing for All money, which places a very particular and very strong focus on reuse and reuse in residential terms, we will have to start seeking a stronger commitment for projects which propose residential reuse, that in fact happens. So that will become a much stronger feature of this. Other question then, were the roof tiles reused or new tiles, Joe, Colette?
Yeah, so we use as many as possible of the roof tiles, and usually, it's kind of 50%, and then we kind of resourced, second-hand kind of Bangor Blues in. We put the old ones in the front elevation, and then there was the second-hand ones in on the rear elevation. Okay.
So other than that, I see a lot of questions. Here's one for you, a chicken and an egg one. What came first, the commitment from owners or the commitment of funding?
The commitment from owners came first, because again, we identified sort of what we identified the local authority in conjunction with the Ballyshannon Regeneration Group. We identified the scope of the works and the extent of the project, and then we approached the owners then and asked for their commitment, and we secured their commitment prior to our application.
Okay. We can come back if we've missed some of those comments or questions, but Joe, Colette, there are words being used like inspirational projects, and a lot of people really impressed with the scale of work that's being done. The Minister again talking about inspirational work and looking forward to visiting. And
I look
there you
forward to
are,
that.
people talking about a couple of weekends away in Listowel and Shannon over the coming months. So well done. I think I'd have to say one thing about Shannon. We were all really struck when we were assessing the sheer number and the force of feeling and energy that we saw in the letters of support that came in with the application. They were really compelling. So that level of community support was very clear. So thank you, Joe. Thank you, Colette. What I'm going to suggest now is that we take a 10-minute break. It's gone 11, so we'll keep going. So welcome back, everybody. Our next presentation, I'm delighted to see Kathleen McLaughlin is here, Heritage Officer in Wexford County Council. And this is another double handler with Tygo Corcoran, a Senior Engineer with Wexford County Council. And they're going to tell us about the Selene Street and Enniscorthy streetscape improvement works. So are you okay to go, Kathleen?
Yep, I go first there, Ian. Thanks very much. I'm just going to turn off my video link because my reception isn't great today.
Yeah.
So thanks.
That's perfect. We can see that.
Can you see that?
Yeah.
Great. Hi everyone. Thanks very much, Ian. I'm going to talk to you today about our Selene Street Regeneration project in Enniscorthy, County Wexford. I'm going to co-present with my colleague Tag O'Corcoran, who will speak after me. And so our Historic Towns Initiative 2021 focused on Selene Street in Enniscorthy, and the project was for the improvement and enhancement of the facades of 22 buildings on the street. As part of this, new PVC windows were replaced by timber sliding sash, original timber sash windows were repaired, buildings were painted, gutters and downpipes were checked and cleaned, wires on the front of the buildings were decluttered where that was possible, and it is quite awkward as others were pointing out, and an energy audit of selected buildings was undertaken. This photograph on the left shows the street before any of the works were undertaken, and you can see that it's quite a hilly street. It's pedestrianised, and the historic buildings are over the whole street. There's no gaps anywhere in the street, which is great. Just to give you a bit of a historical context on Enniscorthy, for those of you who don't know, Enniscorthy is located towards the centre of County Wexford. It was originally founded as a medieval town in the late 12th century on the River Selene, and the map on the right-hand side shows the Selene there flowing through the centre. The majority of the town is on the west bank of the Selene, and then the historic district of Temple Shannon is on the east side. Selene Street is indicated there by that red arrow. This gives a better view of the street in context of the town. You can see on the left-hand side up at the Market Square, Selene Street then leads down towards the Riverside and Enniscorthy Bridge. And on this image, you can see the blue dots representing the buildings on the street, which are part of the National Inventory of Architectural Heritage. And towards the bottom of the screen as well, you can see Enniscorthy Castle, which is quite a pivotal building for the town. This photograph is great. I think it really encapsulates the historic nature of Enniscorthy. On the left-hand side, you have Enniscorthy Castle overlooking the town. There's a lovely historic streetscape there going across the riverside. There is the historic bridge dating to the 18th century. And then we have Selene Street indicated again by the red arrow. It connects up to the Market Square, as I said earlier. Now, in Enniscorthy, on the eastern bank of the River Selene, there was an early monastic site dedicated to St. Shannon that was dating to around the 6th or 7th centuries. But Enniscorthy town itself is really medieval in date and was founded following the Anglo-Norman invasion of the late 12th century. The castle that you see there up on the photograph, there was a castle in the early 13th century, but the one that is here now is very much a rebuild in the 16th century by Sir Henry Wallop. and was actually extended in the 20th century by the Roche family when they took possession of the castle. Enniscorthy actually became a significant plantation town by the 17th century, and the layout of the town that we see today is really a reflection of that. Following on to the modern period, these historic photographs are fantastic, and they really give you a flavour excuse me, of Enniscorthy, you know, in the 19th and early 20th centuries. The image of on the top is lovely. It's taken from the bottom of Selene Street and shows that street in context. And many of the buildings that you can see in that image are actually part of the Historic Towns Initiative project. The image on the bottom is lovely, and it reflects the market square of Enniscorthy on market day. And Selene Street, you can just see, if you can see my cursor, is going down there through the market square. Now, severe damage occurred in the 1798 rebellion. The town was rebuilt in the early 1800s. The town is also noted for its cultural and literary associations, particularly with the very celebrated designer and architect Eileen Gray, who was from Enniscorthy. The poet Anthony Cronin was actually born in Selene Street, and novelist Colm Tobin is from the town. However, like many market towns in Ireland, the town has really suffered economically in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. The population of Enniscorthy town centre actually decreased by 34% between 1981 and 2016, and the proportion of vacant buildings is higher than the national average. The project aims, these two photographs show Selene Street from top and bottom before the project was underway, and you can see how it really is a linking arterial street in Enniscorthy. A steering committee was set up in advance of the application by members of Reimagining Enniscorthy, which was a local business group, and members of the local community. And this group were actively seeking projects for the enhancement of Enniscorthy town. At the outset of the project for the Historic Towns Initiative, 3 project aims were identified. The first of these was renovation, to improve aesthetics, to make the street a more attractive place to live, shop and visit. Sustainability, to support the sustainability of the built environment and the architecture of the street. And animation, to animate the street with the aim of addressing the residential and indeed commercial vacancy you know, in Enniscorthy. And why Selene Street? Well, I think we've seen that from the previous slides. It's one of the key historic arteries of Enniscorthy, which links the market square to the bridge in the river. It's a narrow pedestrianised street on a hill with a very high level of footfall. It is located within an architectural conservation area and contains buildings which are listed in both the National Inventory of Architectural Heritage and the Record of Protected Structures. Several buildings retain original shop fronts and timber sliding sash windows, and many buildings were in need of repair or improvement. And you can see from the 2 photographs on the right hand side, these 2 buildings are actually part of the project, and you can see that they were very much in need of repair and enhancement before this project was undertaken. Our works were plan-led, building on a range of strategies presented in the following documents: the draft Wexford County Development Plan, Enniscorthy Town and Environs Development Plan, the Wexford Tourism Strategy, Enniscorthy Town Centre Health Check, Tidy Towns Public Realm Award Report, Architectural Conservation Area Statement, Wexford Local Economic and Community Plan. And Wexford County Council has undertaken previous historic building refurbishment throughout the town. Other notable projects include Enniscorthy Castle, the Courthouse, and the refurbishment of the municipal district buildings in the Market Square. The photograph here on this slide is as works were finishing up, and you can see even the painting of the buildings has made a huge difference to the street, and some of these windows have also been repaired and fixed as well. So during our project, we undertook some public engagement, and at Heritage Week, a photography exhibition was held using the shop fronts of several of these premises, showcasing the historic photographs. And that was really fantastic. People love seeing historic photos of their towns. It really gives everyone a talking point and something to look at and realise that the towns were so thriving, you know, previously, and we can try to get back to that. Transition year students were visited the site as well to see the works in progress and talk to the contractors undertaking the Sash window repairs. And that was great, getting the, young people talking about conservation and repair versus, throw everything away and just put in new PVC. And communications were undertaken by Wexford County Council via social media channels and a brochure. So we had very positive outcomes from this project. There was a great increased collaboration between Wexford County Council and the community, the building owners, the business owners, people who live in Enniscorthy. New stakeholders were engaged because of the process. Even the works taking place started conversations. People would walk down the street and go, oh, what are you doing and why are you doing this? And as part of that, then we have an increased awareness of the value of the traditional architecture of the time and the promotion of the use of traditional skills and why we should repair and enhance rather than replace. There has been decreased vacancy on the street as a result of this project, and absolutely there's been an increased vibrancy and confidence in the place. And again, this photograph shows the lovely painted buildings now, the refurbished arch here, and it's been a very successful project. That is it for me, so thank you for listening, and I'm going to pass you over now to my colleague Tag O'Corcoran.
If you could enlarge it there, please,
Yeah,
Ian.
you can move to it.
Thanks, Ian, and thanks, Catherine. I'm Tag O'Corcoran. I'm involved in the project as project manager since March, and I'd like to thank the Heritage Council for giving me help with this, and all the local residents. So I'll just take you through how we set up the project, the works that were involved, improvements to the public realm, and an energy audit, which was part of the project as well. On the next slide there, we just show Market Square. That's the centre of the town, as Catherine was saying, the Market Square leads down from the west down Selene Street. And if you wouldn't mind going on to the next slide as well, Ian, please. There's a view down the street before the works commenced. See, it's a narrow pedestrian street. There was some works done on it in 2010 on the paving and pedestrianisation. And on the right hand side, you see a view up the street. It shows the very steep gradient of Selene Street, which is 110 metres long, and the levels increased by 12 metres, giving a gradient of 11%. If you wouldn't mind going on to the next slide, Ian. The Reimagine Enniscorthy team were a vital part of this in the application and during the works. They were a group of voluntary business and community leaders established in 2019, whose vision was to support the huge potential of Enniscorthy to be an attractive, enjoyable and smart town to live, work and visit. The Selene Street project members of the team were Dervla Tierney, she was a chartered accountant, Jim Cavan is an architectural draftsman, and Alan Quirk is director of the South East Development Offices. We had weekly meetings from the end of March, which were held to coordinate the project. The Reimagine team liaised throughout with each of the 22 property owners in the project that were involved in the project. Pre-contract works were agreed with the owners on painting, windows and doors. And Catherine McLaughlin's previous slide shows the project. This was including removal of UPVC windows, original sash windows that were repaired, and buildings were painted. Gutters and downpipes were checked and cleaned, and the decluttering. Then the properties were selected based on whether they were a protected property under the current development plan, National Inventory of Architectural Heritage, registered property, or vacant properties at the time. 22 properties were selected out of a total of 34 properties in the project area. The public realm works were agreed with the committee, and local contractors carried out all the works. If you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, please, Ian. Once the HDI grant was announced in March, as I said, our first steering group meeting was on the 27th of March, and initially we tried to get architectural draftspersons and quantity surveyors from within the County Council, but they were unavailable because everyone was so busy at the time. So quotations for those services were sought and finalised in May and early June. At an early stage, we realised that we would have difficulties seeking suitably qualified tenders, and also the demand for such contractors was very tight following the opening up of COVID restrictions and lack of materials due to Brexit, glass and timber in particular. The project contracts, our health and safety documentation and drawings were prepared in May, June and July, and advertised in e-tenders in July. With the tenders, the reason we went to tenders was try to maximise the number of people who would come in and would be involved. And there is a 3-week period from when you advertise to when they have to reply, and that took up time as well. If you could go to the next slide, please, Ian. An architectural conservation architect, grade 1, was also procured to approve all the design works for tender documents and inspect the works as they progressed. The tenders for the windows and doors, we had 2 contracts. Windows and doors contract was contract number 1, and they were requested in late July, return date. Unfortunately, only 1 tender was received for the windows and doors contract, but luckily they had significant experience with similar conservation works elsewhere. Wexford County Council awarded the contract in early September following checks of insurance and health and safety issues and all that. The tenders for the bill of quantities were priced for each individual premises for both painting and the windows and doors contract, and also we included on 20% funding, minimum funding from the property owners, included all costs for VAT, preliminary costs such as health and safety insurance and public realm improvements where they applied to the building. The property owners were required to sign a legally approved consent form to allow for the works to take place, and they had to pay their 20% contribution upfront prior to the commencement of the works. Windows and doors contract started mid-September, and the painting contractors started just after it. Both contractors had to work with one another on an overall safety and health plan, with only one contractor allowed into any particular premises on a week-by-week basis. We'll share that. Next slide, please, Ian. Yeah, this is an example of number 9 in Selene Street, which is there was unsightly cables. If you look at the picture on the left-hand side, unsightly cables, windows missing and things like that. And on the right-hand side, we see that the windows have been replaced with timber sash windows, and the cables have been tidied up. Okay, the next slide, please, Ian. Yeah, and this is number 26 and 27. Before on your left-hand side, and on the right you have the buildings where the new sash windows and the new light. You see the existing light there. It's a bit gaudy and has been replaced by an energy efficient light, and it sits in better with the facade. Okay. And again, number 2, painting and replacement of aluminium windows and sliding slash windows have been replaced, and the facade has been painted as well. And then number 18, traditions. Again, the windows here were repaired. The originals were still there and painted as well. You can see the workmen there. They have to work from indoors, and situations where that's where you could only have one contractor on site at any one time. Thank you, Ian. And this is number 22. Again, this was repair of original sash windows, and they're 2 up, 2 down, and the whole facade was painted as well. And this work, this is one of the main improvements in the centre of the street. Okay, Ian, thank you. Next slide. Again, on the left-hand side, the picture shows how we had to protect the public from falling while the work was going on. Also, the tight access, keeping the street pedestrian friendly and everything like that. The middle picture shows how awkward it was for getting into some of these places and how restricted the sites were. and on the right hand side, one of the buildings was being done up at the time. So that work has been going on slowly for 5 years. So we provided new sash windows there as replacing the UPVC. Thank you, Ian. And then the painting work, because of the slope, which I mentioned earlier, the slope is 11%, so mobile elevated working platforms had to be provided, and the painting contractor carried out most of the work during the September and October, working off this platform for, a lot of them were 3-story buildings, 2-story buildings, so access was quite difficult. And we were lucky that we had a good autumn, so that meant that most of that work was completed on time. Thank you. And again, the public realm work then is we were repairing slip, trips and fall location. Here's an ESB manhole where the cobble lock was replaced, repairs and replaced of litter bins on the street, repair and replacement of bollards and railings, declutter unsightly power cables and CCTV and comms wiring, which we saw earlier, number 9, and cleaning and repair of gutters and downpipes, which was done for all 34 properties. And then we replaced public lights, as you saw from the slides earlier as well. Thanks, Ian. Then I mentioned earlier that part of the project was for an energy audit, and the audit was to make recommendations on possible upgrades which would allow for a more efficient running of the building and higher comfort levels. This was the building chosen was for 186 square metre 3-story building from the 1900s, and had been vacant for a number of years and was in poor repair. The tables below set out what the preliminary list of energy efficient measures were, and the capital cost of the works would be estimated at 47,864, with a possible grant of 30%, and the total investment required by the property owner would be 32,051. This would give a simple average payback of 4.32 years. And the table, if you could go on to the table there, Ian, please. The table indicates that the main savings were for attic. If you provide attic insulation of 300 millimeters fiberglass wool, the cost would be €1,890. The cost after grant is estimated at €1,323. The savings per annum of 1,482, with a quick payback period of 1.27 years on that, and the internal walling insulations of 120 mil polyurethane. Again, the prices are given there. Cost of 14,000, a payback of 6 years, and the solar panels are also recommended at a cost of 9,600 and a payback of 9.5 years, and heating air source heat pump of 8 kilowatts at a cost of 12,500. After the grant, it would cost 8,700 to the property owner, giving an annual saving of 2,158, and the number of years payback 6 years. And finally, we have in the last slide, I give the contacts for the various grants that are available from SEAI for community groups, for homeowners, and for small business owners. Thank you, Ian. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Kai. Thank you, Catherine. Just checking the chat function, the chat button. Some questions about the insulation specifications in a historic building tag. Any comment on that?
I've been involved in 2 buildings, as Catherine mentioned, the Market Square and the Courthouse in Wexford, where we tidy them up offices, and insulation is vital for the use. So if you can provide insulation to the maximum level, it gives great comfort to not only the people who work in the office, but also the people who visit the offices every day. I would recommend 6 insulation completely around, all parameters, floor, walls and ceiling at the maximum rate. And then that makes your heat, when you provide a heat pump, it works in the background. It gives you the heat that you require. There's great adjustment now with new modern heat pumps and heat systems. Insulation in the walls is really, that's an extra. So if it's feasible, that's fine. But insulation also gives you insulation from sounds. And as you discussed earlier, sound insulation is very important in urban areas. Yeah, both internally within work areas, but also between the building and outdoors. But because they're historic buildings, they all have to be designed within what is feasible within what is protected structure and what is protected within the. Each site is different, Ian.
Yeah.
Can I jump in there, Ian?
Yeah, go for it, Colin.
Yeah, thanks. We're well aware that the insulation and thermal efficiency improvements for historic buildings is a tricky enough subject because the buildings are built in a, inverted commas, non-standard way, the old-fashioned traditional breathable way. And there are nuances about how such buildings are best upgraded without doing damage to them. Jackie is here from the department, and Jackie and I sit on a committee that is steering through revised and enhanced guidance on energy efficiency in traditional buildings, which I think we hope will see the light in 2022. In addition to that, the Heritage Council will be running continuing professional development training for specifiers of building works for energy efficiency. We're hoping that that will happen in May and June of this year to address these problems directly and ensure that our historic fabric is saved to the maximum extent whilst we address the energy efficiency of our building stock, which is an incredibly important overriding climate action. But we just need to make sure that we do it right. So there are answers there. They do take a little bit of care and attention, and this is an issue for which more information will be forthcoming in the short term in this year.
Look, the energy efficiency and retrofitting of historic buildings is worthy of a meeting and a discussion in its own right. I think what is interesting about this is the fact that Wexford County Council opted to do this audit in tandem with this, and I think that's laudable. There are things we can all learn from it. Rose, so we've slipped a little bit behind schedule, but we will now go to Burr to hear about the Burr Courthouse conservation project in the really, really interesting and very fine town that is Burr. And from Amanda Pedlow, who's the Heritage Officer with Offaly County Council. I can see you there and you have it all set up. So over to you, please, Amanda.
Great. Thank you, Ian. Hello, everybody. So this project was managed by myself with Rachel McKenna as conservation architect. And you can see the courthouse here on the left, and the road that you're looking at is coming in from Tullamore. So it's the main road into the town. And this is obviously a key building here on the right. And you can see it's quite an interesting facade, and with the entrance here, the railings are all still intact. This picture is from earlier on the last century, but fundamentally it's the same, except the doorway entrance has changed. So we went back to, we go back to 2009, and we did the public realm plan for Burr Town, and it was really a hugely important document. And we met every month with the Director of Services, the engineer, architect, the town planner, myself, and the Burr MD at the time, the Town Council MD, and we literally went through the public realm plan project by project, and we delivered a lot of work onto that. And then last year, that public realm plan was reviewed for Burr, and it was very useful to get, I suppose, a report on how we were doing and where we were heading. the original report has a series of landmarks at risk, and 8 key buildings are listed in the public realm plan. And you can see the courthouse is here on the top now. It's 2009, so the court was still being used as a courthouse, but we knew that the time was coming, you know, when it was being wound down, and it was already in poor condition. The courthouse was being used by the court service in the front, and there was part of the back of the building which was used by the Old Town Council as the area works office. So extraordinary when you look at it now. There's a tiny little side lane that our trucks used to go in and fill at the back, and we had already moved out of there to this building on the right, which is the old Fusion Convent. So so anyway, it was interesting that as I said, the dual use, and we'd already left in 2009. Now, when the municipal district, you know, offices came in, the town council ended, a community group came together in Birr, and they called themselves Birr 2020. And they basically have a mandate. They really felt that Birr needed a focus and more of a voice when the town council closed down. It would have been a very proactive and, you know, close-knit town council, and they really felt the gap. So this community group came together, and they've done a number of projects. But one of the projects that they did was looking at buildings in the town and saying, what could the reuse be for them? What could, you know, what would be appropriate? And they also, there's a very, very strong arts presence in Birr town, and a number of artists were looking for places to work from and to be based on. So back in 2019, they got funding from the Offaly Local Development Company, and they did this project called the Birr Creative Court Proposal, a scoping report of the potential of Birr Courthouse. And they were really looking at it as 100% arts use. They then approached the chief executive and said, look, this building is still sitting with the OPW. This stage, the courts had closed since 2013, and there was nothing happening. There was the fire alarm, you know, on, but that was it. There was no other maintenance going on in the building. So last year then, the chief executive agreed to take over the building into the council's care from the Office of Public Works. So as part of the County Heritage Plan programming, with support from the Heritage Council, we commissioned a conservation master plan, which was done by Harley Hayes, Cooney Architects. And that worked in parallel with the programme that we needed to do for urgent works on the courthouse building. And we had a steering group for that, and part of the steering group, Birr 2020, were involved there. And that was a really important process, because they had looked at drawings of the courthouse. They had walked around it, you know, with the OPW had opened it up for them, and they had walked around it a couple of times and seen the building. But to actually get the reality of what could it be used for and how could it be managed, it was really important to have them involved in it. And it's one thing in theory to say to the chief executive, we'd love to have that building and we'd love to use it as an arts hub, but it was a very good process to have them involved in seeing what would actually be involved. They had an idea at the beginning that they could maybe take some of the rooms and they could be used, but of course actually the building was in appalling condition, and none can be used really until all can be done. All the Mcauliffe and all of the the services need to be completely redone. So this conservation master plan was done in parallel with our application for the Historic Towns Initiative. These are just some of the pictures of the inside of the building. So over on the left, the top left is the old jail cell and the corridor down to the jail cells. And of course, these have been closed off for decades and decades and decades. It had only been the court room itself and the jury room and the judge's room that had been used. The rest of the building was completely closed off for many years. And actually, funnily enough, the jails are quite interesting spaces. You know, they've got these lovely, you know, arched roofs, and, you know, they were whitewashed originally, and the windows are all boarded up at the moment. But actually, they would make very interesting spaces for working, and that's what the Creative Court were drawn to, that they could have these, you know, artists' units. And then as I say, the corridor runs down. And this is part of the courtroom. Really bad rain ingress, appalling amount of water running into the building. And then the old stairwell and part of the courtroom. This is just to show the scale of the building. So the street facade is here. So the building, the there's quite a long section of 2 floors of these jail cells. So there's 3 jail cells here, and then a guard's room at the bottom here, and this is the ground floor. So there's quite a lot of units, quite a lot of rooms within the building, and then this large courtyard at the back. And again, through this process, there's a number of festivals in Burtown, and particularly the Vintage Week. And we've been doing a number of outdoor projections, looking at historic buildings and, you know, telling the stories of the history of the buildings through projections. And of course, last year, there was a lot of funding for outdoor performances. And while Burr is a fantastic Georgian town, it's very intact. And they're actually, funnily enough, there aren't very easy performance spaces that can be managed. So it came out through discussions and through meetings with members of Burr 2020 last year, that they actually said if they could sort out the courtyard at the back, which, as I said, just had a couple of props for us, you know, for the lorries to refill for the diesel tanks when we were working at the back of the building, it could be a really good space, you know, for art performances. So that element has kind of come out through the process, whereas the original creative quarter looked more at the use of the building. So we literally held our breath when we applied for the Historic Towns Initiative, because we were really, really, really needed to get on site quickly. The amount of water coming in was just horrendous. And works had been done in the 1990s, but the lead had been laid back to front, and it was actually funneling the water in instead of out. So we really had to move quite quickly. So we were very, very relieved when we heard about the funding coming through. Now, the roof did consume a lot of the budget. We got 220,000 from the Historic Towns Initiative, but very luckily, we also managed to amalgamate that along with contribution from the council with the Historic Structures Fund, because we were very, very conscious that while a lot of the groups that were involved in this project knew what was going on, it's frustrating sometimes, of course, with the roof because it's not always obvious. And so we prioritised the windows to the front facade. The windows had perspex PVC, perspex put up and some PVC windows put in. In the past, they were really a mixed mash. It wasn't a question, like Rosemary was saying in Waterford, where we had a lot of original windows we could work on. A lot of them had been patched, as I say, perspex sheeting in front of them. There was plants growing behind them. It was just horrendous. So we did get the windows done to the front facade, and that again, as other people have said, brought a real lift to the street and a lot of public commentary, whereas a lot of the works to the roof went as visible. Now, Rachel McKenna, who is conservation architect, I said that to her one day and she said, what? She said, every time I park at the traffic lights, I notice the roof, I notice the chimneys, but of course, it wouldn't have the same impact, I suppose, for people driving past as much. But Rachel, of course, is loving the properly restored roof and chimneys. So altogether, then we spent about 350,000 on the building. Now, the Conservation Master Plan is saying that in order to get it fully into use, we're going to need about 2 million to do the amount of work that needs to be done. And it just is a reflection, I suppose, on when building, the necessity for when a building stops being in use for a, mothballing scheme to be put in place until, a new use is found, because a lot of damage has been done in the last 10 years. Now, the building wasn't in great condition when the court service was there, but it certainly, it certainly needed a lot of work. And you can see this is the local newspaper, and it was a really big story in Burr. People have been talking about this building, but like for the last, 12, 15 years, wondering what was going to happen to it. And it formally came into our ownership last year. So it was a huge, big story. And there's very good occupancy in Burr Town overall. And this was one of the key buildings that people were really concerned about and said, look, we really don't want a building that's of such importance, to slip further. So there was huge relief when we managed to, at least at this stage now, we've managed to save it from deteriorating, and hopefully it'll be the beginning of the upturn for it. So this is one of the older maps, and a lot of people talked earlier on about the importance of the archives and so on. And of course, we've got the extraordinary Burr Castle archives, that have so much about the whole development of the town. And you can just see, you can just see at the top of that picture, you can just see where the jail is located on the main street coming into Burtown. Here's the square here going on down the main street, and then the castle, you know, is over this side here. So it's in a very key location and has been for over 2 centuries. So the next steps are we're back at bases, and again the conservation master plan. We printed it. You know, management team won't have it. Bar 2020 have it. And we're at the stage of discussing now and getting down to the of say where to from here. So we have a number of uses. We're looking also at the Leo office, maybe having some of their units, then mixing business and arts, and using the courtyard space at the back. So hopefully we'll be back with a positive, you know, images of people being back in the building. There's an awful lot of space there for reuse, and that's what's really driving it.
Thank you, Amanda, for your presentation on Burr. Very informative. I see people putting up posts. Great project, Amanda and Rachel. So I think that is a good reminder. These are, and this one in particular is a really good example of the heritage officer, the architectural conservation officer working closely. Okay, so thanks, Amanda. Our next presentation then, we're going to go to Dara Carroll, who works for a company that you may have heard of called MCO. And we engaged MCO last year to carry out a review of the Historic Towns Initiative. The idea was, what can we learn? What can we change? And Dara is going to give us a sense of the emerging findings of that review. We haven't fully concluded it yet, but we're nearly there. So Dara and Caoimhín, who we worked on it with, will give us, Dara in particular today, will give us a sense of the emerging findings and how it went. So over to you, please, Dara.
Thank you very much, Ian. You can see my screen there?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks for the introduction, Ian. Yes, I work for MCO. We're a multidisciplinary strategic design and project management consultancy. My colleague Caoimhín Corrigan sends his apologies. Some of you may have met Caoimhín in a previous review we did with the Local Authority Heritage Officer Programme. So you probably, some of you may have met Caoimhín then. So just trying to move on there. Okay, so our brief for this piece of work, in this evaluation, we sought to consider the impacts and outcomes of the HTI program and look at the practices and processes of the program, including eligibility requirements, assessments, scoring criteria, and also guidance and training associated with it. Our methodology included an analysis of Heritage Council documentation from going back to 2018, a consideration of the broader policy context, a survey of local authority officials with knowledge of the program, and thank you to all who contributed to that survey, and also some interviews with a small number of stakeholders. So in terms of the policy and investment context for built-in heritage, so what we considered it in context of key policies from listed over there on the left of the screen, from Project Ireland 2040 to the Climate Action Plan, to the RSCSs and County Development Plan frameworks. Briefly, our analysis found that the program is fully in line with Project Ireland 2040, the program for government, and the Heritage Council's own strategic plan. The Housing for All recognition, and Housing for All was touched on earlier, and we'll hear about that later, the recognition of the role of HTI programme can play. Although the application of the programme for housing has added challenges to the programme, and that may be discussed later. Analysis found that the HDI programme needs to continue to target climate action. We also, RSCS frameworks highlight the importance of built-in heritage for placemaking and regeneration, and for broader economic development and social, cultural agendas. We also saw that many of the issues and challenges identified by the previous Town Centre Living Initiative pilot also were relevant to the HDI programme. In terms of the investment context to the programme, we found that, you know, the analysis showed that there is a USB in how the HDI programme does the following things. It unlocks the potential of historic buildings that are not necessarily protected structures. It facilitates investment in both private and public and private property, which enables and encourages an integrated approach within town centre regeneration. And also, we noted the agility of the HDI programme to support other policy agendas, such as town centre investment, footfall and commercial activity, tourism, climate action, and town centre living. And, you know, some of the other funding streams that we also noted on the left there from the Historic Structures Fund, Built Heritage Investment Scheme, Streetscape Enhancement Initiative. So they were all considered as part of this process. So in terms of the emerging research findings, as Ian said, this report is still in draft form, but has been presented. And some of the impacts and outcomes of the scheme that we highlight here. In terms of its aims and objectives, I think we found that clear targeting of the HDI programme could support local delivery of national priorities. Benefits and beneficiaries of the HDI programme include bringing buildings back into use. Obviously, we've heard enhancing public realm, supporting climate action, and that's increasingly important, acting as a catalyst for additional investment. It strengthened commercial activity, and also it highlighted the social and community benefits, including increased engagement, pride of place within towns, and I think that's quite evident in some of the earlier presentations, and just stressing the importance of community engagement, and then the benefits accruing to that. We found that there are wide-ranging beneficiaries from the scheme, from residents, businesses, and communities. In terms of impacts and outcomes and encouraging private investment, the scheme has encouraged private owners and occupiers to invest in works. And given the level of investment required to make streetscape projects happen, and as you will be familiar with, buildings are largely in private ownership, the manner in which investment is often targeted at multiple adjacent buildings, and the role of local authorities in facilitating such investment, it's highly unlikely that sufficient private investment required for this level of capital conservation would happen without the HDI programme. In terms of the wider policy response, capacity of the scheme to enable wider policy objectives to be delivered through conservation-led investment is also borne out by a range of aims met by specific schemes. Then in terms of emerging research findings, in terms of the practices and processes of the scheme itself and the programme, it was generally found that the application process is relatively straightforward, but it is noted that a number of local authorities have never applied to the HDI programme. The application process appears to be well focused, competitive and robust. In terms of training and support, there's strong support during the application process, but possibly room for improvement in relation to support for utilization of funds awarded. Peer learning can play a role here, but there are resource implications in the provision of enhanced delivery support. I mean, peer learning at events such as this event today is clearly of value and benefit. In terms of delivery timeframes, I mean, in terms of the scheme, there's small underspend in terms of the annual allocation, but you know, shows demand for the scheme. But as has been noted in a number of the presentation, and it came through very clearly in our consultation, is that there's a strong call for more realistic, in other words, longer timeframes for the implementation of historic towns initiatives needs to be considered, and I think that the 2-year funding has been is a welcome outcome from that. In terms of financial support and match funding, the current level percentage of that funding is likely to remain important, but consideration needs to be given to the impacts of construction inflation, which is evident particularly evident in recent years. In terms of local authority resources and expertise, findings, we found that, you know, the absence of specialists or sufficient resources within local authorities, and this you'll be familiar with this, many of you, can be a barrier to HTI applications, and the stark reality that, you know, approximately 50% of local authorities do not have a dedicated architectural conservation officer. In terms of our emerging recommendations, and this again, it's a very brief synopsis of the more lengthy report submitted to the Heritage Council. I'll list some of them here. We need to strengthen alignment of aims, objectives and criteria for the HDI programme. There needs to be a review of delivery timeframes as discussed and consider a 2-year delivery. Need to review the scale and nature of awards, take account of construction inflations, as I've touched on, costs associated with proposed housing, the enhanced focus on climate action and related costs of that. Need to strengthen supports for delivery of the HDI programme for local authorities and the Heritage Council itself. A need to strengthen integration of HDI programme delivery with delivery of related initiatives, aligning guidance and support for the HDI programme with other built environment policies and funding streams. And we need to strengthen the evaluation and communication related to the HDI programme. I'd like to thank you for that. It was I tried to keep the presentation as brief as possible. I'm conscious that there are other presentations to come. But if there are queries for myself and Ian as the client, you're very welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dara. There was a question that Deirdre McDermott posed, and I wonder would any of our panelists attempt to answer it. To what extent do heritage officers and conservation officers that believe that success is influenced by CEO, Director of Services support? Anyone on our panel like to have a go at that? Or any kind of a comment?
I'm happy to say that in Burr, our Chief Executive Director Service, they were absolutely focused on it, and they'd looked at it in previous years, and I would agree with what a lot of people have mentioned, that there are a lot of resources needed to go into managing the scheme, and we were managing one building. You know, sometimes I get a bit boggled when I think of, you know, managing the 15 or 20, and you know, so it's a huge labour input for that. So I suppose what you need most of all is not for your chief executive, your director of service, to say, that's a great idea, but to be able to say, and prioritize your time to delivering it. I also think that a couple of local authorities seem to be putting in money into the scheme. And I think that Joe has mentioned that before, that helps with, project lag at the end of the year, that the receipts can get into the Heritage Council. And then as long as the local authority expenditure is all sorted by the end of the year. So that seems to be really proactive if the local authority is in a position to do that. So I think that helps too. But to me, it is resource heavy, and that's the key question: is that time going to be allocated with the amount of work that's needed and the other schemes coming in?
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. Anybody else want to give an answer based on their experience? There is a comment about regeneration officers, but I'm not sure how widely spread on the ground they are across the local authorities. I'm struggling to think of us dealing on any HTI project with a regeneration officer. I see the answer from Stephen is yes, they're not. Yeah, so thank you for clarifying that. The other point then, I think it was Sammy put it up about villages. We had to pick a population cutoff for this scheme, and we picked it at 1,500. So a population above that. The feeling was we had to cut our cloth in terms of the amount of funding that we had, and that if we went down to the level of villages with a smaller population, the value of the fund would be diluted and we would be inundated with applications. So we were going very much the level of towns above an indicative population figure of 1,500. So just to draw a line under the MCO report, we have to conclude that we have been able to reflect several of those emerging findings in the 2022 scheme, and I'll show that. And then we will publish that, the MCO evaluation, when we have it concluded and when it's been to our board. Okay, I'm going to move us along now, even though I know there is more things popping up in the chat, because the clock is ticking. We're just going to go to Colm now. Colm is, I'm sure, known to all of you, or many of you. Colm is the architecture officer in the Heritage Council, and he has some thoughts on encouraging residential reuse. So thank you, Colm.
Hi, Ian. I'm trying to share my screen now. A small presentation. I hope, can you see it?
No, it hasn't popped up here yet. Okay,
I'll start again. Or have I frozen?
We can see you moving, but we can't see any slides.
Can you see them now?
Not yet. Not yet. Yes. Yeah. Now, can you move to full screen? Yes. Perfect. Thank you, Colm.
Okay. So I'm beginning with a very bleak image from 10 or 12 years ago. So let's take it as a negative starting point, but trying to figure out where we're going with this. As Ian has said earlier, and I think it's an incredibly important point within the policy machine of government, but also in a world that is going to have to change quickly in relation to climate change. But this scheme will be trying to ensure that we achieve actual residential use in the buildings that we're treating. This year we'll be giving high priority to it, but the pressure will come on as the years pass to ensure that there's bang for the buck, that we have a house, a family living behind walls in a street building such as the one that's up above us here. And I like to try and take a long perspective on this as well. And I've passed through Charlestown and County Mayo, the subject of John Healy's book, The Death of an Irish Town, which was a cry of pain. But I remember on one visit to Charlestown, after his book was published, finding this little cafe and restaurant that proudly said that it was established in 1972. That is after this town had supposedly died. So I think there are more indestructible than we give them credit for, and we must try and figure out how to make use of these resources. The first point I'd like to make is that local authorities' role is crucial. We've heard examples today of how important interdepartmental cooperation is within the local authority, whether that's the heritage section, if it's not in the planning section, if it's and if they're not related directly to the development section, or indeed to the section that is tasked with dealing with housing. This internal cooperation and coherence within the planning authority is crucial. And if our money helps to facilitate that with a view to making housing possible, more possible, to make it possible to reuse these assets, then that is something that this scheme can badge with pride. Planning policy is obviously a crucial starting point, and the zoning question. I remember, and I hope this is no longer true, once asking a planning officer about what their development plan said about people living over the shop on their main street, and it led to a bit of head scratching. And the planning, the development plan actually said nothing, and yet that's a crucial place to go to ensure that we begin to encourage people to live in houses on streets. We also have vacant housing officers, and I'll talk a little bit more about them. They were what were being discussed in the chat in advance of my particular talk. And the phrase I'd like to use there, I think when the example was first mooted 3-4 years ago, and looking at the British examples, effectively what was in question was a street level bureaucrat, someone who knocked on doors, talked to people, figured out what their problems were, found ways to help them solve them. And sometimes the provision of information or awareness of what local authorities can do, or to put someone in contact with an auctioneer, an architect, who knows. These are the critical things that can help move a property out of vacancy. Someone who's aware of the machinery of administration and is attempting to help to solve problems using that machinery. I'm also aware, and I hope that this isn't jumping the gun, but the town centre first policy, I think, will say a lot about transport and the way we move around in our towns, or indeed between towns. The obvious problem is that cars dominate at the moment, and that is, in broad terms, difficult from the point of view of residential amenity. But if someone is to live in a town, they also need to know where the shop is and that they can go get their shopping, and indeed the pub, and indeed the running track or swimming pool. So these are really important things that are part of planning policy. My colleague Ali Harvey has been introducing the concept of compulsory sales orders, and floating that as a potential useful idea, not saying that a property ought to be bought by a local authority, but that if anyone else owns it with a creative idea about it, perhaps it will have a more constructive future to play in the public life of the town. So all of these things are really important in the life of, in the role and ambit of local authorities. This is a little picture of some research that we carried out in 2015. And I'm showing it just to give a sense of the different things that preoccupy people about their lives and how they may need to be reflected in towns. I won't dwell on it, but this is what people see as being important. More specifically, if people are to live in towns, they need to have residential amenity. And here's a brief list. It's far from being comprehensive, but these are some of the key things that might matter when people think about a street as being livable or not. And as I say, this is just a first shot at defining what that might be. But consideration of these things in the way that you might frame a historic towns initiative application, and whether street that you're preoccupied with has these things or not, could be very useful in helping us to understand how it will become livable. Taking an example of a building in Galway that I'm familiar with, the project of moving back into a street building is a considerable one, and being a project, being a thing that involves money, time, planning, design, setup, can be intimidating for your average building owner. And I've just got this little snapshot of all of the multiple difficult, diverse factors that a local authority will throw at a building owner to try and, before they're allowed to make plans to reuse it. And this is difficult stuff. And I think when we look at it from the point of view of the building owner or the potential resident, we need to find ways to reach out and help people overcome these problems. And the biggest one, they shouldn't be ignored, but the biggest thing that a local authority can do is to proactively involve themselves in solving all of these problems together. That's conventionally understood as a one-stop shop, providing coherent answers to queries about adaptive reuse projects. Some of the issues that I've mentioned there touch on the building control regulations, which are very difficult as well to negotiate for the average non-expert building owner. So we need to see things from their point of view and help solve them. And if these barriers can be overcome, then we are in the position to offer our towns as places where people can live. I love this quote from some years ago. Official Ireland needs to recognise where people actually live. And I mean, of course, it's maybe a little bit missing the mark, but people do live in towns and they need to be supported in the way that their areas are managed, either through planning policy or transport policy, or even those things with utilities and services, so that the residential quality is respected where it exists, and that it is reinstated where it is possible to do so. And again, in all of this, I'm emphasizing the role that local authorities can play, because it is local authorities who are applicants to this scheme, and we're trying to get this scheme to merge with solving problems such as the housing crisis and such as the efficient use of resources in the face of climate change. I ask the question, many of our towns are full of small houses, and I ask the question, who wants to live in a small house? Are there ways to think creatively about how houses could be merged so that they provide adequate floor area for modern lifestyles? And again, this is an area where public authorities can help and be creative and help people to make use of these assets that we have. In a sense, this is the ideal, seeing lights on in the upper floors of buildings in the winter time. And ultimately, it does amount to cultural change in the way we think about the places that we have. And many of the heritage officers will have heard me say this before, but I see many, many new roles within local authorities where it is cultural change that the local authority is tasked to deliver, and not just technical or engineering solutions to problems. So we're persuading people to recycle their waste. We're persuading people to take care of their buildings. And now we need to persuade people that towns are good places to live in, and that it's a sensible thing to do to make use of perhaps an inherited asset, but to ensure that it is being used with people living in it. Going back to the planning issue, there are international guidelines and charters and so on that point to urban heritage as something more than the individual building, and also to insist that heritage and the functioning of towns as such is something that is heritage, and the uses that we put to towns to, that this is heritage, and as such it does need to be managed for in the planning system. So the focus is there on ensuring that all of the things that can be done through planning and development control and future planning are aligned to help get people living back in towns. A quotation that is echoed by a comment that Dara made just there now, that heritage is a public good. Our streets and vibrant towns, socially useful towns, are a public good. And there is a case for subsidising the management and care of that public good. And it may well be that there are specific costs and even benefits for individual owners, but there are benefits that accrue to us as in the wider community also, and that is the reason why we're carrying out this investment. If we can align things such as the cosmetics of painting and ensuring that the exteriors of buildings are beautiful, if we can align that with all of the other things that public policy needs to do, making use of resources and resolving problems in housing, then so much the better. I think that's what how this scheme can score. I hope I've given just a few outline indicators, no case studies I'm afraid or anything like that, but some outline indicators of how looking through the Historic Towns Initiative can help to make a contribution to solving housing problems and also the climate crisis as well. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Colin, for that. It's very, very expansive. I have to say, I've always enjoyed since you pointed me in that direction. Nobody shouted stop. I've mixed up the title, but the book on Mayo and Charlesfort, it's a great read, and it's well worth, when you read it, going back and visiting the town, because it brings it to life in the 1960s. Some very interesting comments there, Colin, in response. Thought-provoking, inspiring, the importance of public ground plans. Yeah, renovation has a lower environmental impact and is better for the economy than new build. As people working in heritage, we all passionately believe in that. Minister, an important comment that we haven't really grappled with today about the need to acknowledge urban biodiversity and green infrastructure. That's incredibly important, but also inclusive spaces for young people. A very interesting comment from Tom Cassidy about setting aside the polluter pays principle on projects like this. I suppose in a way the essence of the HTI scheme is it's giving people a help and a subsidy in terms of upgrading buildings. What I'd suggest, Colin, is you might have a look at some of those comments and maybe you could respond to them. And while we may not get to all of them this morning, we will certainly go through all of them as we do our debrief from this webinar. I'm going to move on now. So thank you, Colin, to give a sense of the HTI scheme 2022. And Amanda Ryan is going to join me later as well. Amanda is our grants officer. Now just bear with me while I share. Okay, can you see that?
Yes, it's fine.
Okay, thanks, Jackie. So our scheme 2022, it's hard to believe, and the Minister said it, that this is our 5th year of running this. And we are learning, and it is changing as we develop it the whole way along. So really, and I think a lot of the projects this morning, we saw how much this scheme works from the strength of local communities and businesses supported by local and national government. The range of issues facing Irish towns, as we saw today, are pretty complex, and they have a long-term trajectory. And national government working on its own, or even with local government working, isn't enough. It needs a joined-up approach in terms of local communities and civic societies and groups as well. And that's very much been the approach of the Heritage Council on this. I'm not going to go through all of the towns that we've done these projects in, but they're listed there, 23 towns, and I'm hoping we'll add significantly to that this year as well. So the kind of, what are we at? Well, we're aiming to provide support to historic towns engaged in a programme of heritage-led regeneration. So to that end, with the department, there's a fund of 2 million in capital available to local authorities under the HTI. So it's the same scheme that we've used previously. Each local authority will put forward one application for funding under the HTI. We will only take applications from local authorities. We estimate about 10 to 12 projects this year in 2022. To be assessed by the HTI National Steering Group. That's essentially made up of the Heritage Council, our colleagues in the department, and Fáilte Ireland. As you heard, a plan-led approach always helps. So what kind of a plan is that? It can be a HTI management plan based upon the HTI framework that we devised during the pilot for this in 2013-14. A conservation plan, a public realm plan, actions from a town centre health check plan or equivalent. But a plan-led approach is good and always helps. In terms of operation, same as previous years, we expect local authorities will work with a range of partners in delivering projects. Evidence of such partnerships, letters of support, should be included with any application. They always help. So again, one of the points Dara mentioned from the IMCO review was allowing for inflation. So we estimate price tag, an upper end of the award will be 250,000, obviously depending on the projects proposed. Application should reflect the scale of the likely funding available and be achievable within the allocated time frame. Now I say 2022 there, I'll come to that in a subsequent slide. And then we also like to see strong public engagement. So under Heritage Week, we like to see a Heritage Week event, something to market. And I think what you saw was a really good example from Listowel in terms of the event with the archivist and the Victoria, the conservation officer. What towns are eligible? Well, frankly, almost all Irish towns are historic. A town, however, under this scheme should possess significant cultural heritage assets of a distinctive sense of place. Historic towns can include those of medieval, pre-medieval foundation, plantation towns, planned estate towns, and those established around local industries. I don't think we've ever dismissed or said a town wasn't eligible because it wasn't historic. The one thing we do exclude is urban centres designated as special regeneration areas under the Living City Initiative, because they receive a tax incentive under that particular scheme. Now, what's new in 2022? Well, what's new is that, and we touched upon this, the Housing for All policy 2021 cites the HTI and seeks to enable it or promote it as a vehicle to bring back vacant or underused floor area in historic buildings, so to bring them back into residential use. So to that end, what we've changed this year is that grants which specifically address residential reuse by encouraging private owners and their occupiers to invest in appropriate conservation-led works and repairs to bring vacant floor area back into residential use may be phased over 2 years. So in other words, 22 and 23, subject to a maximum award of 250,000 in total per town. And the reason for that time frame is that we appreciate that there's a complexity in these projects, but as well as that, there may well be regulatory issues involving planning or fire regulations. There may be design implications as well. In other words, planning may be required. So really what we're saying there is that projects which are ambitious and which shows residential reuse proposals, we will be looking at them in terms of a 2-year cycle. However, we will also have a pot of money that we have to spend in 2022. So there are projects that will come into us which we will be looking to be delivered in 2022. So while there is an element of a 2-year funding cycle, we will still need projects to be delivered, certain number of projects to be delivered in 2022 to meet the requirements of spending the pot of money in 2022. So applicants should check their letter of offer for details of how funding is to be spent. The letter of offer will also include contractual procurement and governance conditions. Now, the other thing that's new under Stream, what we call Stream 2 this year, is we will support applications to deliver a heritage-led regeneration plan to look at the existing heritage of a town and determine what conservation-focused interventions are required. The idea behind this is that we'd like to see other towns coming forwards. We'd like to see other towns use this mechanism to come up with a plan almost as a pump priming device to come back in future years with a HTI application. Or it may help them with other funding mechanisms either. So under Stream 2, we'll award up to 40,000 per town for a heritage-led regeneration plan. Again, we'll be looking for the 20% match funding from the local authority. So what works are eligible? Well, it's essentially capital works to repair and enhance the heritage of a town. Heritage-led regeneration projects designed and implemented by local authorities. Projects that encourage private owners and their occupiers to invest in appropriate conservation-led works to bring vacant floor area and historic buildings back into use. Projects that address vacancy, dereliction, conservation of landmark buildings. So, for example, the buildings in Burr, the church or stroke theatre in Listowel, improved maintenance and general improvements to streetscapes, conservation-led public realm works. The climate change lens as well is becoming increasingly important. So projects that build resilience in the historic built environment of the town. So all grant-aided work under the HTI must obviously respect the character and special interest of individual buildings. That's what we do. That's what we insist upon. And then obviously the statutory requirements. Now, where grant funding is sought for conservation and reuse of vacant buildings, we will be seeking information on a sustainable proposed future use. If we receive money under the Housing for All policy, we will be by necessity required to be able to capture and measure and demonstrate a discernible change in vacancy and reuse. We have to be able to show that this scheme has an effect in that regard. So we will be looking for a proposed future use, and as money is awarded and drawn down, we will be looking for commitments about buildings being in residential use. That will be an important feature. So the application process, each local authority is invited to apply in respect of one historic town with an indicative minimum population of 1,500 inhabitants. That's really to get us into that kind of urban, large or small to medium town, and rather than providing grant aid to villages, for which there are funding mechanisms out there. And again, as mentioned earlier, town partnership teams and local steering groups are really important. So the application should set out the significance of the town, its heritage, relevant policies and objectives for the town's track record to date. At a very early stage in this scheme, we wanted to use this as a mechanism to bolster local authority heritage staff. So we like to see the involvement of architectural conservation officers. We'd like to see the involvement of heritage officers. And then the vision for the town. What is the vision? What's it set out in terms of a management plan, conservation plan, and so on. The application process, what would be funded? And we'd like to see detail in that. What buildings? And I'll come back to that. What partnerships, including letters of support, the extent of matching funding, contribution in kind proposed, leadership. Who's the director? Who do we contact? Who's the person we ring when we have a query about this or when we want to visit? Now, the assessment criteria. And this is essentially, we have an Excel sheet, we have the applications, and we have 5 criteria, each marked equally. So it's 20%. So the town's track record to date in heritage-led regeneration, the extent to which the application fulfills the aims of the HTI is likely to make a significant contribution to heritage-led regeneration, the extent to which private owners and their occupiers or community groups will bring and keep vacant or underused floor area in historic buildings in use, particular residential reuse, but also addressing dereliction and vacancy, the quality of the projects proposed, how the project will build resilience in the historic built environment in terms of climate change, and then the presence of a vibrant and engaged community. Letters of support are generally how we gauge that last field. Now, onward funding. This is important. Onward funding is essentially where a body like the Heritage Council receives money from the department, and we then pass it on to a local authority who may then make an onward grant to a building owner or owners. That's onward funding. And you'll note by the way I've described it, there are a number of links in that chain. And the key principle is that we need to have clarity, certainty about how that funding is used and how it goes. In other words, we need to have a clear line of sight on it. And there is a circular specifically on that. And the key thing is, if it's the intention of the grantee, so in this case, that's the local authority, to make onward grants from the funding received from their own grantor, in other words, the Heritage Council, details of these onward grants and the recipients proposed recipients must be provided to the grantor, along with details of the terms and conditions. So essentially, what we're saying in that, and this isn't new, we've been operating this for some time, but it's always something we have to stress, is we need to have clarity on where the funding is going, how it's being used, and to see the paper trail and evidence trail for that. So what that means at application stage is we'd like you to identify the individual properties. Tell us the properties that you envisage being granted, if you are doing streetscape works, that is. And we do appreciate that there is some room for change on that. Additional properties may want to come in, you might lose some properties. So we understand that that can change. But at application stage, we want to see what the individual properties are. We want to know what they're about, what they look like, what their names are. And then at the application stage, it would be very beneficial to describe how the monies will be transferred. We've seen a couple of models used to date. The main two are what was described in Bali, Shannon, where you have a group like a residents association, they have a collective bank account, they have a legal agreement with the council, and the residents commission the works and invoice the council. There's that model, or there's also the model where the council undertakes the works and collects the money based on invoicing to building owners. So there are a couple of different models out there. We just like some clarity on that as the scheme goes. Essentially, we need to know, just this to recap this slide really, we need to know how the monies will be transferred to individual private building owners if you're going down that route. So you will hear quite a bit about onward funding in terms of this scheme if you apply. And then finally, proof of payment is required at drawdown. The Heritage Council has a template for that, and we will be continuing the use of that, and we may well develop that further as well. in terms of housekeeping, applications will only be accepted from local authorities. So it's one historic town. Applications, I think people are used to it now. We've been using an online grant system for a number of years now. People are well used to that. And then the deadline is Thursday, the 3rd of February. In a previous document that went out, I said Friday the 3rd. The 3rd is a Thursday, so it is Thursday, the 3rd of February. And then the deadline for submission of final claims and reporting to the Heritage Council is November 18th, 2022. So that's a key date. So that's it. I'm now going to hand over to Amanda, if you're there. Amanda. Hello, Amanda.
Sorry, Ian, I am here.
Great.
I couldn't unmute my button. Yes, I'm here. So I'll share now, if that's okay.
So Amanda is the Heritage Council Grants Officer, and she's just going to give a sense of the advice she gives people when talking to them.
Start at the beginning. Can you see that, Ian?
I can, yes. Off you go.
Okay. Okay. Hi, everyone. As Ian said, I administer the grants for the Heritage Council. So Ian and I would work very closely on this scheme and indeed a lot of our other schemes. So just to kind of briefly go through some just tips and advice about making your application and using the system. And apologies, there's probably a little bit of overlap with what Ian has already told you and with my few slides here, but I won't delay you. So basically, yes, they come in through the grants online system, which is housed on our website, the funding page of our website. Deadline the 3rd of February 2022, 5 p.m. And that 5 p.m. is 5 p.m. The system will shut down automatically. So we cannot accept applications or supporting documents after that deadline. Applicants will be notified in writing of the outcome the week beginning the 28th of February. That's following our council board meeting. Now, we are currently working remotely, so more than likely you will get an email to let you know that the letters of outcome are available on your login section of the website or of the online system. And the date of submission, Ian has always said to you, and we do, if you are awarded funding, you'll also have 2 other deadlines within the project cycle, and that is to submit an interim or progress report. But that'll be in the letter of offer, and we'll also send out reminders. We're also going to host further Zoom webinars for successful applicants during the project cycle, one following offer and one in advance of claiming funding. So just some advice. The biggest one is please read the scheme guidelines. Allow enough time to complete your application. The system is live. It does time out, so make sure you save your information as you go along. I would suggest that you start the application as soon as possible and upload information as it becomes available. Because it is a time-consuming process, and we have seen in the past where people have spent a lot of time on the application and 5 o'clock comes on the deadline date and they're shut out, and you can imagine the frustration, disappointment. But we unfortunately have to manage a strict deadline, and we can't accept information after that point. Traffic on the final day on the system will be heavy. So as I said, if you can start the application as soon as possible, in particular uploading documents, because you find that can slow down the process. I would also suggest the 5 assessment criteria that Ian talked about earlier, that you complete your application in response to those. And indeed, if you want to create like a template using them, just to make sure that you have responded in relation to how they will be assessed. Make sure on your budget that you allow for the 20% cash contribution. Now, if you are, Ian was talking about onward funding, that 20% cash contribution can be made up of local authority funding or private sector funding from building owners. The assessors will be scoring your application on the information presented to them only. We won't be seeking further information. Now, sometimes what happens if we are issuing an offer, we may set a specific condition in the offer letter along with the general terms and conditions. The application online is a template form, so I would suggest you keep that as brief as possible and concentrate on uploading concise information in the upload section. You can upload as much as you like, but each document can't be more than 10 megabytes. And please convert to JPEG or PDF. Word documents slow down the system and sometimes we're not able to open them. They're not as robust as PDF format. Please don't use any symbols on your file names and clearly label them and so that they match the content. And all files uploaded will be checked for viruses. You'll get that notice or advice when you're uploading, so don't panic, that's normal. And depending on the traffic on the site, particularly on the last day, that could take anything from 5 minutes to 2 hours. So as I said, don't panic. Just a few more tips about the additional information. As I said, really concentrate on this to make sure that you have the required information included with your application. So that will be the methodology for the conservation works and its justification, copies of quotations, estimates. Sometimes that's actually prepared by the conservation architect who's preparing your methodology. He'll put together a schedule of costs. So that's more than welcome. Copies of any previous plan surveys, audits, anything like that. Appropriate evidence of partnerships and collaborations. Ian spoke about the importance of letters of support from local groups. Evidence of any approvals, permissions, anything like that. And Ian was talking in detail, so I won't say much more about the onward funding, which is something that more and more we find that grants in the beginning, the first year of the scheme, it was the majority of applications, I think all of them were to undertake repairs to local authority owned buildings. But each year, more and more local authorities are concentrating on streetscapes and working with private owners. I would say, to add to Ian's advice on what we need to see, we also need to see how you selected the buildings. From a transparency point of view, are you planning a grant competition, or was it part of a architectural audit that identified these buildings? But how exactly were they selected? Assessors love photographs, so plenty of clear, current and captioned photographs. I can't stress that enough. And all our grant schemes, it's always the photographs that really sell a project. And a map is also good. And I would also say, don't assume anything. That assessors are fully aware of your project or what you're doing or what has been done. So just don't fall into the trap of assuming that people know what your works are about. And just to give you, it is a competitive process. All our grant schemes are competitive. But just to give you an idea of the funding and the number of applications supported over the last few years. And as you can see in 2021, which is great, we were able to fund 75% of the applications. Now we only received 12 applications last year, and next year we'll have the €2 million fund, which is fantastic. So we're looking forward to seeing a lot of new applications from new towns, which would be fantastic, so that we can spread the love. And I would say, if you have any problems at all using the system, please contact us as soon as possible. We can't help you if you contact us at 5:10 on the 3rd of February, but we will be available right up to that time. So please, if you have any issues at all, to give Ian or myself, actually I will my mobile number, I'll put it in the chat there, if you have any issues with the system, to ring directly, because more than likely we can help you. And as I said, we can't do anything if it's after the deadline, but if it's before the deadline, we'll do our very best to get it sorted for you so that you are submitting on time. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Amanda. Just looking at the chat function, the chat button there, Francis posed a very good question that I don't think we thought of, being very honest. And the question was, can a local authority apply for a capital works project and a stream 2, in other words, a plan, or is it solely one application per local authority? I think what we will say there is, you can put in for a stream 1 and a stream 2. I think ideally it wouldn't be for the same town though. Now that's if you had the energy to do 2 applications like that. So I think the key point there is, yes, providing it's not for the same town, but that we will be very keen on seeing funding spread around, and we will be endeavouring to see that idea of the stream 2 regeneration plan being used very much as a pump priming device for new towns. So look, there's a number of issues and questions that come up in the chat. I think we've dealt with a lot of them. I see a comment about underused churches and their adaptation. Yes, I think that's a fact. I think we'll go through a lot of these comments in the chat and the questions, and if there's anything that hasn't been answered, drop us a line or call, and we'll endeavour to answer them. If there's anything that's unclear, please make contact with us as well between now and the application date, as Amanda has said.
Sorry, Ian, just to say, I just put my mobile number in the chat for everyone if you just want to take a note of it in case you have any issues during the submission time.
And you'll find my details on the website, the Heritage Council website, and in the HTI page in the press release. You'll find my mobile number and email as well. So I think we're past 1 o'clock now, and it's very heartening to see our participants have staged at the 80 to 100 level. I'd like to thank everybody. Amanda, thank you, but also all our other speakers, everybody for staying with us. And above all, everybody that worked so hard on all these projects last year. Also like to thank the Minister for staying with us in Virginia, and my colleagues from the department. We look forward to seeing your applications coming in on the 3rd of February. We look forward to assessing them. We appreciate that there is work in putting them together. There is work in delivering these projects. There is work in them. But I think what we saw this morning, that they are very worthwhile and they are very good projects. So thank you, everybody. So just say bye-bye now and enjoy your lunch. Thank you.